Chapter 504. Seeing Yang Fan asking Lu Junfan a question, the tall and skinny man holding the Ronin's sword flew into a rage as he stood by Yang Fan's side. But Yang Fan treated him like air, refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. With that, he slashed his sword toward Yang Fan. The reason why he didn't immediately kill Yang Fan was because he was worried that Yang Fan didn't bring anything valuable with him. Now that Yang Fan had angered him, how could he still think of holding back? In this kind of place, it was easier to kill a person than to kill a dog. After killing someone and throwing them into the wilderness, the officials wouldn't investigate and the people wouldn't raise a finger, so there wouldn't be any future trouble. The tall and skinny man had just raised his sword when a huge fist flew over. Bang! His nose was punched and his head buzzed. Then he didn't know anything else. The others saw Yang Fan raise his hand and the tall and skinny man fell straight down. His face was covered in blood and his nose had completely collapsed into his cheeks. It was a frightening sight and they couldn't help but be shocked and angry. Immediately another person rushed over and used Black Tiger Steel's heart. Yang Fan was just about to raise his hand to block when that person suddenly lowered his body and swept his foot toward Yang Fan's lower body. Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh when he saw that person's feint. Yang Fan didn't move, he just bent his knees and lowered his body. That person flew up and swept his leg toward Yang Fan's leg. Yang Fan immediately screamed in pain and hugged his calf and curled up into a ball. He used a lot of strength, and looking at his calf's deformed appearance, it was most likely broken. At this time, another person took out a sharp knife from his sleeve and fiercely slashed it towards Yang Fan's chest. Yang Fan dodged to the side and raised his left leg. With a side kick, the tip of his foot hit that person's ribs. With a cracking sound, 3 of that person's ribs were broken. Blood spurted from his mouth as he fell into the weeds. The remaining 2 people were Lu Junfan and a short and stout man. When the 2 of them saw how powerful Yang Fan was, they couldn't help but be surprised. Lu Junfan hesitated and didn't dare to step forward. When the stout man saw Yang Fan looking at him, he roared and waved the Ronin's sword in his hand. The sword light carried a sharp whistling sound as it fiercely slashed towards Yang Fan's shoulder. The sword light suddenly streaked past. Yang Fan didn't seem to have enough time to dodge. With a flash of the sword light, Yang Fan's shoulder and crotch were split into 2. When Lu Junfan saw this, his heart was filled with joy, but then he felt a bit regretful. In his opinion, it was too easy for Yang Fan to die like this. Lu Junfan still had a lot of evil plans to use on him. However, after the Ronin's sword slashed the shadow, there was no burst of blood. Yang Fan's afterimage disappeared and his figure appeared 10 feet away, standing there quietly. The stout man looked as if he had seen a ghost. He was so frightened that he roared. Instead of retreating, he moved forward and brandished the Ronin's sword with all his might, slashing and slashing to strengthen his courage. Yang Fan retreated again and again. He sighed and said, "This place is ferocious and stubborn. Sure enough, people's lives are like grass." The Ronin's sword in the stout man's hand flashed with a cold light. A clump of reeds where Yang Fan was standing was cut in half. Yang Fan, who had suddenly appeared and appeared again, approached the stout man and heavily slashed his palm on the stout man's neck. Yang Fan did not show any mercy in this palm strike. The stout man's neck was almost as thick as his head, short and fat. However, when Yang Fan slashed down with his palm, it was like a sharp knife cutting a cucumber. Crack! The stout man's head softly tilted to one side. His neck bone was broken by Yang Fan's palm strike. "Help! Help!" A cry that sounded like a cry and a howl came from 20 feet away. Yang Fan turned his head and saw the reeds shaking violently. Clumps of reeds flew into the air, and a line of waves quickly moved in the direction of the river. Lu Junfan was scared out of his wits. He never thought that Yang Fan would be so powerful. He claimed that he had found a fat sheep and met up with his companions. He wanted to borrow their hands to kill Yang Fan, but he did not expect that his brothers would all die here. Especially when the stout man's neck was cut off by a knife, he was really scared out of his wits. Lu Junfan knew that no one would answer him if he called for help here, but he still couldn't help but cry and desperately rush to the river. The reeds here were taller than a person. Nothing could be seen in front of them, only the sound of flowing water. Lu Junfan used all his strength to charge forward. The reeds whipped his face and scratched it, but he didn't care about it. Bang! Lu Junfan ran at the fastest speed she had ever run in her life. Her legs were like wheels as she broke through the reeds and ran to the river. She ran 4 steps on the surface of the river before she fell head first into the river. She floated downstream along the rapid current. Yang Fan chased him to the river. Looking at the floating figure in the distance, he could only give up. He couldn't chase after them anymore. He didn't even have time to wake up the disfigured man and interrogate him. He didn't know if Huang Jingrong would brazenly order a massacre when she led the troops into the mountains. If he delayed any longer, it would be too late. Dongping Ao, like the Peach Blossom Village, was also a small village formed by refugees. The refugees sent by the court to various places were all settled by the local officials for easy management. These small villages, formed by refugees, were mostly located in remote places, separated from the villages of ordinary people. These places did not have fertile land for them to open up, so they could only open up some terraced fields, flat some vegetable gardens, and do odd jobs and make handicrafts to earn their daily necessities. Life here was the same as in the Peach Blossom Village, poor and quiet. There was no glory and splendor, but there was also no deception. The thatched cottages were built on both sides of the mountain, giving it a sense of paradise. But today, the tranquility here was broken. A group of soldiers rushed into the small village like wolves and tigers, violently driving the villagers out of their houses, courtyards, and fields, and gathering them in the open space in front of the valley. There were old people, children, and women in the crowd, but the rarest people were men in their prime. Almost all of these families had committed the crime of rebellion before they were sent to the Peach Blossom Village. The young adults in the family had already been beheaded, and their children had not even grown up yet. The soldiers were holding swords and spears, looking very fierce. Luo Shudao stood on a big rock in front of the valley, rubbing his hands uneasily. He looked up at the majestic Huang Jingrong standing in front of him and licked his lips. The villagers in front of the valley were terrified. The only thing they could do was hug their child tightly in their arms to give him a sense of security. However, even they were confused. They did not know what the sudden arrival of the soldiers was going to do. They did not know what had happened. Their families, their fathers, brothers, or grandfathers had all been beheaded because they opposed the Empress Dowager becoming the emperor, and their whole families had been sent to this place. They thought that they had long been forgotten by the world and could only live and die here. What were these soldiers doing here? Some smart people had already thought of Li Xian, the crown prince of Zhanghuai. Li Xian was sent to Bazhou by his mother, and a few years later, she sent Qiu Shinji to force him to commit suicide. Was this going to happen to them? No one in this small village knew about the murder in Lingnan, but they already felt fear. At the entrance of the valley, there were hundreds of women, children, and old people, but it was very quiet. The wind blew, and the clothes of the people in the valley fluttered, just like the rustling branches of the forest. Huang Jingrong was very satisfied with this effect. Even when he was at the peak of the imperial censorate, he had never tried to control the life and death of hundreds of people with a single thought. This feeling was too wonderful. This was power, power that made people feel like they were walking on clouds. No wonder the empress was willing to kill her own son for the throne of the emperor. If it were him, he would also be willing. Huang Jingrong stood proudly on the rock with her hands behind her back, enjoying the fearful and reverent gazes of hundreds of people. After floating for a long time, she coughed and said, "All of you have committed serious crimes and were sent here. Originally, according to your crimes, you should have been beheaded. But the emperor was merciful and spared you. But now there are people who have not given up, secretly colluding and inciting ignorant villagers, intending to raise flags and rebel. There was a commotion in the crowd. Huang Jingrong pressed his hands down and said sternly, "Silence! I already have concrete evidence for this matter, and I also know that those rebels are about to raise their troops. There are their accomplices among you. Because the rebels are about to rebel, you have to be taken away and watched together. I am very clear and will not let you go unjustly. The innocent among you will be released after I investigate." Hearing Huang Jingrong say this, the commotion immediately calmed down. No one would think that the imperial court would want to get rid of these harmless old, weak women and children as soon as possible. And no one would think that the imperial envoy sent by the imperial court would lie. Huang Jingrong snickered inside. It wasn't that he didn't want to immediately slaughter these people, but some of the local officials and chieftains hadn't delivered their gifts yet, so he wasn't in a hurry to leave. Moreover, the tragedy of Jade Mountain had already shaken all levels of society. Now that he was investigating this case, he could not even put on a show. Looking at this group of lambs waiting to be slaughtered, Huang Jingrong's smile became even more amiable. On the hillside, there were two small figures crouching. They were a pair of siblings who had just run back from the reeds. They were lying there, looking in shock at the villagers who were corralled like cattle and sheep in the valley, trying their best to find their parents. "Mother, I see Mother." The child suddenly pointed at a group of people and shouted. His little but arched, and he was about to climb up and run down the hill. "Huan, don't move." The older sister grabbed him and pressed him down, saying anxiously, "Don't go down. I don't think those soldiers are good people." The little boy asked in astonishment, "Why? They are soldiers, not bandits." The older sister said solemnly, "When soldiers are bad, they are even worse than bandits. In the past, our family lived in a very, very big city and we were sent here by the soldiers. Now that they have captured all the villagers for no reason, it doesn't look like a good thing no matter how you look at it. Huan, you lie here obediently and don't move. Older sister will go down to find father and mother. If there's nothing, I'll call you back down. If something happens, you must not come out. Grandpa Shui Mu, who is hunting behind the mountain ridge, likes you the most. If we are captured, you can go find Grandpa Shui Mu." After the older sister finished speaking, she got up and was about to run down the hill. Suddenly, a large hand reached out from behind her and pressed heavily on her shoulder, pressing her back down to the ground. A voice rang in their ears. "You're right, they are soldiers, but sometimes soldiers can be even more bandits than bandits. At least when it's not beneficial to them, bandits won't kill indiscriminately, and bandits won't easily kill the people who provide for them. You clearly know this, so why do you still want to go down?" Chapter 505. The Cheong Lake was called the Cheong River by the Southerners. It was 20 li wide and more than 100 zhang deep. This was the record of the Cheong Lake in the Book of the Later Han. The Cheong Lake was the Cheong Lake. The people who were taken away by Huang Jingrong were now standing on the shore of the Cheong Lake, where the water was shallow and not suitable for boats. The water and sky of the Cheong Lake were one color, and the scenery was very beautiful. Unfortunately, these people were not here to enjoy the scenery, so they all looked anxious. "Uncle!" The sister and brother looked at Yang Fan together. They were young and did not have the power to save their relatives. When they found a powerful and kind person, they naturally thought of him as their savior. They followed the people who were taken away to this place, because he had to monitor Huang Jingrong's movements and take care of the two children. Yang Fan did not have time to go back and interrogate the fugitives with broken noses and broken ribs. He let them fend for themselves. On the way, Yang Fan had already asked the sister and brother for their names. They were surnamed Gu. The elder sister was called Gu Yuan and the younger brother was called Gu Huan. He was not too clear about their family background. Commoners were generally unwilling to tell their children about their past. At least, They were unwilling to talk too much about the past before they grew up. When they were banished, the sister and brother were still young and did not know much about their family background. Yang Fan thought. Huang Jingrong gathered the people here and did not even allow them to bring their bedding. It is obvious that she wants to kill them. She did not make her move immediately because she wants to show that she has investigated the matter to avoid being attacked when she returns to the court. If I appear now, there will be no problem here. But when the news reaches the capital, the time I appear here will not match. If I escorted the princess to Chang, and even if I rushed here at top speed, I would not be able to appear here so quickly. The Empress hates people who deceive her the most, especially when she lives deep in the palace and relies on external officials for information and actions. She is even more afraid of this. If she finds out that I am pretending to obey but secretly disobeying, the consequences will be dire. Since Huang Jingrong is not in a hurry to make a move, I will wait for 2 more days. Thinking of this, Yang Fan said to the siblings, "The 2 of you don't have to worry. The authorities have locked up your parents and so many other villagers here to investigate a case of rebellion. Perhaps they will let your parents go after the investigation is completed. You 2 come with me first. Uncle will keep an eye on them. If they want to harm your parents, Uncle will go and save them." Gu Yuan blinked her eyes. She felt that this uncle's words were insincere, but she couldn't tell what was wrong. Her younger brother, Gu Huan, was still young, but he didn't think too much. He wanted to run over to accompany his parents, but his sister wouldn't let him. Now he could only listen to Yang Fan's arrangements. Yang Fan and the others continued to wait on the side until Huang Jingrong left a portion of the soldiers to watch over the refugees, while she and Luo Shu Dao returned to the city. Only then did Yang Fan bring the Gu siblings back to the city. Huang Jingrong checked the name list and discovered that a pair of siblings was missing. They were just 2 children, so he didn't take them to heart. Killing 2 more or 2 less wouldn't affect him much. He didn't have the time to wait in the valley and send out people to search for them. He could just pretend that these 2 people didn't exist. After returning to the provincial capital, Huang Jingrong asked for the name list again and seriously studied it. As for the background of these exiled people, he had to find out more about them. If there really were any exiled people who had old friends or relatives who were officials in the imperial court and had great power, then he would get rid of this family. There was no need to offend people who should not be offended. In addition, he needed to understand these people's backgrounds so that he could make the crime of rebellion sound plausible. Oh, the family of the former vice-chancellor of the Ministry of Justice, Li Yueying, was also sent here. Huang Jingrong suddenly flipped to a very familiar name and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. This vice-chancellor of the Ministry of Justice, Li Yueying, had passed the same imperial examinations as him. Later on, they were both in the 3 departments of law, so they were very familiar with each other. How could Luo Shu Dao remember the identities of so many people? He gave a random reply. Huang Jingrong looked at the name list and smiled. He stroked his beard and said with a sigh, "Vice-Chancellor Li was beheaded because he colluded with Zhou Xing and Qiu Shenji to rebel. His family was sent to the desolate border. Turns out they ended up here." This official and Li Yueying passed the imperial examinations in the same year. 20 years later, 1 life and 1 death, 1 official and 1 prisoner. The fate of life really is... Luo Shu Dao was astonished. Imperial censor Huang has friendly relations with this vice-chancellor Li? Huang Jingrong chuckled and said with a deep voice, "The 2 of us were imperial examinations in the same year and worked in the 3 departments of law. So naturally, we have a great friendship." Huang Jingrong's words had a deeper meaning. Unfortunately, Luo Shu Dao didn't understand. Li Yueying and Huang Jingrong were imperial examinations in the same year and both worked in the 3 departments of law, so they were indeed very familiar with each other. Unfortunately, while friends were familiar, enemies could also be familiar. After the 2 of them entered the government, they both worked in the 3 departments of law and their relationship was not bad at first. Later on, two new political stars rose up, one called Zhou Xing and the other called Lai Junqian. The two of them had their differences. Huang Jingrong joined Lai Junqian's faction. While Li Yueying protected Zhou Xing, Li Yueying felt that Huang Jingrong, as an imperial examination scholar, joining a ruffian was a disgrace to all scholars. He was quite disdainful of him, and the two of them became enemies. Later on, Zhou Xing and Lai Junqian fought for power. They each served their own masters, and their relationship became even worse. After Zhou Xing's incident, Li Yueying was also implicated by him. He was sentenced to death for treason, and his family was sent here. Now that he saw his name, Huang Jingrong couldn't help but recall the old hatred in his heart. Zhou Xing was killed for treason. Now that this matter is connected, why don't we use Li Yueying's family as the main culprits? The Li family was dissatisfied with the death of their master and colluded with other exiles after being sent here. Huang Jingrong thought about it and felt that this wasn't convincing enough. The main culprit could be the Li family, but there had to be someone who could be regarded as the leader. He should see if there were any imperial disciples among the exiles. If there weren't, he could say that they served the crown prince or the prince of Luling of Fang province as their master. In addition, this group of exiles won't be able to accomplish anything. They aren't convincing enough and will have to implicate several tribes. However, there's no rush in this matter. Let's see which chieftain doesn't come to present gifts tomorrow and then label him as a traitor. We can't let go of that fuming period. We'll include him as well. Huang Jingrong twirled his beard, his eyes flickering. A groundless case of treason was gradually taking shape in his mind. Luo Shudao didn't know about the grudges between Huang Jingrong and Li Yueying. Hearing his words, he really thought that Huang Jingrong and Li Yueying were old friends and wanted to help Minister Counselor Li exonerate his family. Although Luo Shudao couldn't remember Li Yueying's background, he suddenly thought of Yang Mingxing's family who had moved here because of Zhou Xing's case. He continued, "Yes, because of Zhou Xing's case, many people were implicated. There's a local family that was ruined because of Zhou Xing's case." Luo Shudao casually mentioned the situation of Yang Mingxing's clansmen in Feng province. After the Yang family returned to their former residence, they had visited him in order to find a backer and even sent him a generous gift. He was also aware of the marriage between the daughter of the Yang family and Fuming Period's son. Otherwise, the already ruined Yang family wouldn't be worthy of meeting him. Now that Huang Jingrong and Li Yueying were old friends, he could make use of this matter to form a relationship with the Yang family. This way, it would be easier to resolve the conflict between Huang Jingrong and Fuming Period. Huang Jingrong didn't know how much power Fuming Period had in the southwest, but Luo Shudao was well aware of it. That Fuming Period might look like an inconspicuous country bumpkin, but he had more than 100,000 tribesmen and dozens of white barbarian tribes attached to him. Even Luo Shudao didn't dare to offend this kind of power. Now that Fuming Period was on bad terms with the imperial envoy, it became a sore point for him. Since there was a chance to reconcile, Luo Shudao naturally wouldn't let it go. Unexpectedly, Huang Jingrong was overjoyed when he heard this. Back when the Ministry of Justice and the Censorate were like fire and water, their relationship was even worse than the current relationship between Yang Fan and the Censorate. Currently, Yang Fan was the only one in the Ministry of Justice to challenge the Censorate. Back then, it was Zhou Xing and his subordinates who suppressed the Censorate. As Zhou Xing's #1 fighter, Yang Mingxing had a deep grudge with the Censorate. Furthermore, Fuming Period left in a huff during the banquet yesterday, which also shredded Luo Shudao's face. Luo Shudao wanted to teach this person a lesson. Now that there was such a good opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, how could he let it go? Hearing Luo Shudao's words, Huang Jingrong's rebellion plan was immediately perfected. Huang Jingrong immediately said to Luo Shudao solemnly, "Governor Luo's words are wrong." Before Yang Mingxing died at Zhou Xing's hands, the imperial court didn't pursue the Yang family's responsibility. who would want to harm them. Zhou Xing has been rebellious for a long time, and the Yang family is already deeply involved in it. They won't stop just because of Yang Mingxing's death. After Zhou Xing's rebellion failed, the remaining members of his faction were either killed or demoted. The Yang family, as his trusted followers, were unwilling to give up, so they followed him here and contacted his old faction to plot a rebellion. Governor Luo, you've fallen into their trap. You say that the Yang family is ruined? What a great joke! When Yang Mingxing was in power, he plundered the wealth of the people. The so-called ruined is just an excuse. The money was used to buy the hearts of the people and plan a rebellion. The Yang family used a young girl to marry the head of the white barbarians. It's also a trick. They want to buy the barbarians and make them their own. Luo Shudao never expected that his words would lead to such an ending. Luo Shudao stammered, Is that so? Huang Jingrong's eyes turned cold, and he said in an awe-inspiring voice, When I was in the capital, I received a secret report. Governor Luo, you're in charge of this area, yet you know nothing about this? In a noisy cart shop in the west of Feng Prefecture, there was a dark and dirty room. More than a dozen burly men were either standing or sitting in it. The room was filled with the stench of sweat. Some of the burly men had fierce eyebrows. Some had crooked noses and stared. Their expressions and mannerisms were all different. It was as if there were statues of Luohan standing in the Luohan Hall. In the middle sat a burly man, but he didn't look like a Buddha. His figure wasn't tall and sturdy, but he exuded a fierce, murderous aura that no one dared to underestimate. Lu Junfan was standing in front of him, crying with snot and tears. Two people were lying behind Lu Junfan. One had a collapsed nose, and his face was covered in blood. The other had a broken leg and was curled up like a chicken. As for the man with broken ribs, because he was not treated in time, blood overflowed from his mouth and nose while he was unconscious, and he had already suffocated to death. The other man, who had his neck broken, was naturally also dead. His accomplices threw the two corpses into the bushes and didn't even bother to bury them. Whoever dares to touch my Sima Bai's people, I'll take his life. The burly man sneered and said with a murderous aura, Speak, where does he live? Chapter 506. Come, are you hungry? I bought more, enough for you to eat for 3 meals. Eat slowly, don't choke. Yang Fan put down the food and patted Gu Huan's head lovingly as he watched him wolf down the food. Oh, there's a smoked rabbit here. Yang Fan walked to the corner of the wall and took out an oiled paper bag from a wrought tin basket hanging on the wedge of the wall. The smoked rabbit was still wrapped in oiled paper. He tore open the oiled paper and placed it in front of the siblings. Gu Yuan ate much more gently than her brother. She took small bites and worriedly said to Yang Fan, Uncle, do you think my parents have anything to eat at the Cheongqi Lake? They didn't bring anything. Gu Huan was starving. After walking for so long, he had not eaten anything. When the little guy was growing, food was consumed quickly. He tore open the oiled paper bag and twisted off a rabbit's leg. He smelled it greedily and took a big bite of the rabbit meat. Hearing his sister's words, he couldn't help but raise his head and said, Yes, not only did my parents not bring food, they didn't even bring bedding. Do they have a place to sleep at night? Yang Fan smiled and said, Don't worry, even if they've been convicted and thrown into prison, they have a place to live and food. How can they not have food and a place to sleep? The authorities will take care of these things. The siblings believed Yang Fan's words and began to eat their food with ease. Yang Fan didn't let the Chun family know that he brought the 2 children back. Although the house was rented, the landlord had the right to interfere if he brought people back without permission, especially people of unknown origin. So the 3 of them didn't make much noise in the room. After dinner, Gu Yuan didn't need Yang Fan to say anything. He took the initiative to pack up his things. First, he carefully put the rest of the food back into the basket and tiptoed to hang it on the wall. This way, he could prevent mice from stealing it. There was only a small oil lamp in the room, and the light was very dim. Even so, in order to prevent people from passing by the window and seeing them, Yang Fan did not light up the lamp. The three of them ate at a place with their backs to the window, and when the sky turned dark, they rested. Yang Fan gave his couch to the two siblings and put two benches together to serve as a bed for the night. The siblings were still worried about their parents' safety. They lay on the bed and worried about their parents. Yang Fan quietly comforted them and talked to them. The sky gradually darkened. The brother and sister had been running around for most of the day, and they had also suffered a scare. They were really exhausted. As they talked with Yang Fan, they unknowingly fell asleep. Yang Fan rested his head on his arms and listened to their steady breathing. He let out a long sigh, and a trace of worry appeared on his face. From Huang Jingrong's actions today, Huang Jingrong's killing intent had finally been aroused. Yang Fan was too naive. After fighting with the ruthless officials for so long, he still believed that they would at least have some humanity left in them, hoping that Huang Jingrong would leave after extorting some money from them. This was a rare opportunity for the Imperial Censorate to make a comeback and regain their power. How could they be willing to give up on this opportunity? They had to make the public angry, and everyone felt insecure. They had to make the emperor feel like he was in danger. Only then could they achieve their political goals. From this, it could be seen that the other imperial censors had the same thoughts as well. Yang Fan really wanted to resolve the matter here and head to other places as soon as possible. But how was he going to resolve the trouble in Jiannan? There were 43 prefectures in Jiannan alone. Even if he could stop Huang Jingrong from killing in this place, how could he stop her from committing murder elsewhere? If he were to follow behind Huang Jingrong all the way, even if he were to follow Huang Jingrong and save all the refugees in Jiannan, what would happen to the refugees in other places? Yang Fan thought about it, but he couldn't come up with a foolproof plan. The Empress hoped to use the imperial censor to eradicate the hidden threat, so he couldn't count on the officials. Could he rely on his martial prowess? Then he could only stop the killings by killing. For example, sneaking into the military governor's manor at night and killing Huang Jingrong, then sneaking into the other prefectures and assassinating the other imperial censors. But that was all he could do. He knew that this method couldn't be used. If the imperial censors who were investigating the rebellion of the refugees were assassinated one after another, the consequences would be unimaginable. At that time, this case of rebellion would be viewed as an undeniable fact by the Empress and all the officials in the royal court. At that time, Wu Zetian would no longer send out imperial censors. Instead, she would send out generals who could command thousands of soldiers and horses. She would create a reign of terror in the world and use mountains of human heads to quell this rebellion. All the refugees would die and more officials and commoners would be implicated. The imperial censor would once again stand above the officials, and more Zhouxing and Lai Junqin would appear in the royal court. How troublesome! Yang Fan sighed deeply. Closing his eyes, he muttered regretfully, "I'll do my best and leave the rest to fate." In the dark alley opposite Chendiu's house, several pairs of cold, wolf-like eyes reflected the starlight, glinting in the darkness. The leader of Lu Juanfan's gang, Sima Bai, asked, "Little Lu, what does this family do?" Lu Juanfan replied softly, "Big brother, this family is a merchant. I heard that they deal in silk, swords, seafood, and everything else." Sima Bai was relieved upon hearing that. His gang specialized in the smuggling business between Great Tang and Tubo, and the entire Jiannan prefecture was their territory. Due to this, they didn't have a fixed base, and Fengzhou City was just one of the places where they settled down. They didn't have any qualms about not eating the grass near their nest. Most of the wealthy families were in cahoots with the authorities, and if that was the case, he would still have some reservations. However, looking at the style of this family, even though they were merchants, they didn't seem to have much influence. Since he was already determined to kill that Yang Fan, killing one or two wouldn't make a difference. Since that was the case, he might as well rob this family and take some money back. Thinking of this, Sima Bai's eyes sharpened, and he ordered, "The two of you, climb over the wall and kill that young Fan and the family that took him in. Little AI, old Kai, the two of you go and deal with that young Fan." Knowing their boss's character, the subordinates nodded in agreement and made their way to the Chen residence. Just as Yang Fan was about to go to sleep, he suddenly heard some movement. His ears twitched, and he straightened his back and sat up. His figure flashed, and like a ghost, he flashed to the side of the window. He peeked outside, then flew to the side of the bed and lightly patted Gu Yuan's shoulder. The little girl woke up. She opened her eyes and saw a dark figure standing in front of her. She was so scared that she wanted to scream, but her mouth was immediately covered by Yang Fan. Yang Fan whispered, "Someone's coming. Wake your brother up and hide in a corner. Don't come out unless I call for you." Lu Junfan was careful. He didn't go to the side courtyard that Yang Fan was in, nor did he choose the main courtyard next to Yang Fan's residence. Instead, he specially chose the side courtyard on the other side of the Chen residence. Thinking of how they had blocked Yang Fan on the road today and how the five of them had been easily beaten by Yang Fan, he had been afraid, especially that short fatty who was so fat that his neck couldn't even be seen. In the end, Yang Fan had broken his neck with one chop and his head had hung limply. Thinking of that appearance, he felt cold air coming from the back of his head. It was best to stay as far away from such a terrifying person as possible. The two people who had climbed into Yang Fan's courtyard had been with Sima Bai the longest. It was said that they were originally two horse bandits who belonged to the powerful horse gang in the southwest, Beard Ba. Later, they had been defeated by another horse gang that had quickly risen. The newly risen leader of the caravan was nicknamed Little Flying General. Bearded Ba and his subordinates had been beheaded by Little Flying General. Bearded Ba's caravan had disappeared, and the two of them had fallen from being horse bandits to bandits. They had been recruited by Sima Bai and became his capable subordinates. One of the two people was a Tibetan and the other was a Han. The Tibetan was called Ai Chi, and the Han had an elegant name, Kai Min Heo. His father was probably literate, or he had specially invited a teacher to name his son. He had hoped that Kai Min Heo would grow up to be an examiner and become an official, but he had somehow fallen to become a horse bandit. Nya flipped over the wall and glanced at the silhouettes of her companions who disappeared in a flash. She grumbled, "Mother Her, all of them are rushing to the master's house. This troublesome fellow is left to us." Kai Min Heo drew a narrow saber from his back and said with a low laugh, "Who asked us to be so good at kung fu? Even if they were to team up, they still wouldn't be our match. Only the two of us can do this job cleanly and efficiently. Let's go and finish off that brat with one strike. It's not too late to go to the back residence to snatch things." The two of them were used to working together. They made a hand signal and moved forward along the left and right corners of the courtyard. Ai Chi made his way to the door of Yang Fan's room and pushed it open. He lowered his voice and said, "The door is bolted. I will break in. You keep watch outside." The person on the other side also came over and said in a low voice, "There's no need to go in." Ai Chi frowned and said, "Nonsense. How can we kill without going in? Do you know how to use a flying sword?" The person on the other side laughed and suddenly appeared in front of him like a ghost, giving Ai Chi a fright. The person on the other side didn't even sway. It was as if he had just floated over from a distance of more than 3 meters. It was really frightening. Ai Chi was about to scold Lao Kai when he suddenly realized that this person's facial features were somewhat different from Lao Kai's. Not only was his appearance different, but his height was also different. Ai Chi's heart skipped a beat. Before he could react, that person stretched out a big hand and grabbed his neck. He couldn't even breathe, let alone shout loudly. Ai's feet slowly left the ground as he was lifted by that person. Cracking sounds came from his neck. His own weight was about to break his neck. The blurry face in front of him seemed to be smiling. With a chuckle, he said, "I'm already out. Why are you still going in? Chapter 507. Yang Fan's words were the last words Ai Chi would hear in his life. After Yang Fan finished speaking, the hand on Ai Chi's neck loosened. Ai Nya, whose face was completely red, slowly fell down. Before his feet even touched the ground, his chest was struck by an iron fist that was as large as a bowl, causing a muffled piou sound to ring out. His entire body flew out like a scarecrow and forcefully smashed open the door between the side courtyard and the main courtyard. The two bolted doors were smashed by Ai Nya, his body causing the fragments to fly everywhere. In the quiet night, the commotion was extremely shocking. Mother ***, what the hell is going on? The two bandits, who had just reached the backyard, suddenly heard a loud noise behind them. They couldn't help but stop in annoyance and curse in a low voice. They could no longer sneak attack. Two white figures had already appeared in front of them after the loud noise. They were two people in white robes. "Who are you?" The two white barbarian warriors shouted angrily. When the two bandits saw that their tracks had been exposed, they no longer hid. They had always thought that the people in this house were ordinary merchants. It was not surprising that they had knives in their hands. The people in this place were fierce. Who didn't have a few knives in their hands? Not only did they have knives, but almost everyone had practiced a few peasant skills. In fact, they only had a bit more strength. They didn't take it to heart at all. One of the bandits took a few steps forward and said casually, "Don't be afraid. I want money and not my life. Take out whatever valuable things you have in your house. As long as you know what's good for you, I will spare your life." The two white barbarian warriors were shocked and angry. One of them shouted, "How dare you come here to extort money?" The bandit looked up at the sky and sneered, "You really got it. My nickname is Lu Dedan, courting death." The white barbarian warrior shouted angrily. He waved the knife in his hand and slashed at Lu Dedan. The blade of the saber was long and narrow, and in the darkness of the night it was not very clear. The white barbarian warrior had expected that Lu Daring would dodge, so this saber strike was a feint and did not contain much strength. Unexpectedly, when the saber chopped down, Lu Daring did not even try to dodge. Cha! A head rolled down to the ground. Puff! Blood spurted out, scaring the white barbarian warrior. He couldn't help but cry out, "This guy's courage is really big." The headless corpse stood upright, the blood falling like rain. No one noticed that the hand that had gripped his ankle had withdrawn before the rain of blood could fall. The criminals who broke into the Chun family encountered all kinds of trouble, as if they were born clumsy. In the chaotic battle, someone slashed at the back of one of their own. Someone's belt loosened as they fought, and in that moment of shock, the other party's sharp knife pierced into their own chest. Someone suddenly fell to the ground and offered his head to the other party's blade, Lu Junfan, who suspected that there was a ghost, howled, and ran away. "There's a ghost! There's a ghost!" Lu Junfan jumped over the wall and out of the Chun family's residence as if he was possessed. He ran along the long street in a panic, as if there was a ghost chasing after him. Sima Bai, who was standing guard outside with one of his men, asked in surprise, "What happened to Xiao Lu?" Yang Fan was secretly playing tricks and did not pay special attention to this extremely timid guy in the dark. When Lu Junfan ran away while howling, he recognized that this person's voice belonged to the guy who claimed to know him. Yang Fan wanted to chase after him, but at this time, the Chen family had all woken up. The lanterns and torches were as bright as day. Sun Er was holding her scabbard, excitedly looking for the thief to fight. The few white barbarian warriors were so flustered that Yang Fan was afraid of revealing his presence, so he could only quietly hide. There were no survivors in the courtyard of the Qin family. These white barbarian warriors were the bodyguards of the headman. The weapons they wore were all knives dipped in poison, coupled with Yang Fan's secret tricks. Even if the thief was not critically injured, they all died. As for some of them whose chests had collapsed and some whose necks had been broken. No one could find the culprit. Everyone who saw them thought that they were killed by someone else in the chaotic battle. Holding her scabbard, Sun-Er excitedly walked around the front yard, the backyard, the left yard, and the backyard for a long time, but she couldn't find a single opponent. Just as she was feeling unlucky, the door behind her creaked open. Yang Fan walked out with his back bare, wearing a pair of trousers and his hair disheveled. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and asked while yawning, "What happened? Why is it so noisy?" Sun-Er fiercely glared at him and angrily said, "What a pig!" Without any survivors, it was impossible to figure out the origins of these people, so the old man was very angry. In the middle of the night, his loud voice rang out in the courtyard of the Chun family, roaring so loudly that the entire street could hear him. "Someone actually dares to mess with the Tai Sui!" Coming to this old man's head in the middle of the night. This old man is sleeping soundly. Chen Diyu hurriedly explained, "Elder son, don't be angry. Maybe this is because of me." The old man's voice became even louder. "Because of you?" The old man really did not know who they were after. "Diyu, you have always been honest in doing business, haven't you? Although Pengzhou City is a bit chaotic, it is not common for robbers to break into private houses at night. What kind of enemies have you made?" Chen Diyu smiled bitterly and lowered his voice. "I have always been honest in doing business. Elder son, lower your voice. Don't disturb the neighbors." The old man's voice became even louder, so be it. This old man's head was almost cut off. Shouldn't I shout that I was wronged? "I will go find Luo Shudao tomorrow morning. This kid is getting more and more outrageous. This Pengzhou City has become a nest of robbers because of his management." Sun-Er sighed. "Unfortunately, there are too few robbers. I didn't even have time to make a move." The old man angrily shouted at his daughter, "Who told you to make a move? You are a girl, running around with a knife. Will you still be able to get married in the future? I won't bring you out next time." Sun-Er was very dissatisfied and retorted, "Then should I hide when I hear the sound? Our Sun family has never had a coward, be it men or women." "This is what you said, father." The old man's denouncement of Pengzhou's public security quickly turned into a dispute between father and daughter. Chen Diyu paced back and forth on the side, persuading until his mouth was dry. Both father and daughter were very angry and quarreled as if there was no one else around. In the end, it was Shulian who came forward. Her future father-in-law and future sister-in-law were willing to give her face, and the commotion finally died down. Yang Fan said to the siblings in the room, "It's nothing, just a few ignorant thieves who came to steal things. It has nothing to do with us. You two can sleep in peace." Early the next morning, the old man angrily dragged 7 or 8 corpses to the commander-in-chief's office to complain. Chen Diyu wanted to persuade him to go after breakfast, but the old man only said, "Let that Luo guy take care of my meals. If he doesn't give me justice, I will go to his house to eat every day." He then pouted and left. After more than 2 hours, a group of soldiers came to the Qin family and invited Sun Qi's daughter, the people who stayed behind, and the rest of the Qin family away. The old man's words came true, and the whole family went to Luo Shudao's house to eat. For a while, the Chen family's house was empty, and the tenant, Yang Fan, became the only master of the Qin family. The commander-in-chief's office was the largest building complex in this small city, and some of its organizational structure had already surpassed the organizational structure of the commander-in-chief's office. It was more like an imperial palace. However, these hereditary commanders-in-chief and provincial governors of Jimmy Province were originally like local emperors. When they overstepped their authority, the imperial court would turn a blind eye to it, too lazy to become enemies with them. In the huge building complex of the commander-in-chief's office, there were guest rooms in the 3rd courtyard. However, the imperial envoy was a distinguished guest, so Luo Shudao arranged for him to stay in the 5th courtyard, which was the courtyard that Luo Shudao lived in. The guest rooms on the left and right side of the third courtyard were usually empty, but now the guest room on the right side was full. In the guest room on the right side, the old man was stomping his feet and cursing, his spittle spraying all over Luo Shudao's face. Governor Luo learned from Lu Shurta's style of drying one's own saliva, and didn't move at all, allowing the drizzle to fall on his face. Luo Shudao, you've become quite capable. When your old man was alive, he had to call this old man Big Brother, but now you dare to lock me up. You're really becoming more and more promising. You little brat, if you have the ability, then kill this old man. This old man has 42 sons, and I swear I won't rest until I raze your Feng province to the ground and tear you to pieces. Luo Shudao smiled wryly and said in a low voice, Old master, how could I dare to arrest you? You've seen for yourself, is this a prison cell? I've been treating you like a distinguished guest. Old master, this nephew is your junior, but I'm also an official of the imperial court. Since the imperial envoy has spoken, this nephew has to put on an act, no? Luo Shudao bowed and said, Old master, please calm down. This nephew is truly in a dilemma. When Xuanqi heard that the imperial envoy was causing trouble, he flew into a rage and said, So it's him! What a scoundrel! Using a chicken feather as a token of authority. Failing to ask for a bribe, he wants to frame this old man. This old man will go kill him. Don't. Old master, please don't cause trouble for this nephew. If you hadn't left with a flick of your sleeves that day, is there anything that can't be discussed? Yes, he's too greedy. We could have just returned the money, but you just have to be so stubborn. Xuanqi glared at him and said, So you're blaming me instead? Luo Shudao hurriedly said, Of course not, but Luo Shudao pulled him to the side and said in a low voice, Old master, these people from the imperial court naturally have the imperial court standing behind them. This nephew knows your ability as an old man, but can your ability surpass the imperial court? If this matter were to blow up, Jiannan would be engulfed in the flames of war. Wouldn't we be the ones to suffer? Just as Xuanqi was about to speak, Luo Shudao interjected. That's right, he's going too far. I've already told him about your influence in Jiannan, and even Imperial Censor Huang is a little fearful of it. Furthermore, this nephew is trying to mediate between the two. As long as Elder Xuanqi gives in, everything will be fine. He's just after money, so let him have it. Chapter 508. Xuanqi straightened his neck and clasped his hands behind his back. I don't. This old man doesn't have a single cent. If he has the ability, then behead this old man. Luo Shudao said with a bitter expression. How could this nephew dare to make you pay for it? This nephew has already given the gift for you. This nephew only hopes that you won't be angry at this nephew. This nephew had no choice but to invite you here. Also, when you meet the imperial envoy later, please be a little more polite when you speak. Xuanqi glared at him and didn't say anything. Luo Shudao bowed deeply and said, Old man, this nephew is begging you. Please, for the sake of your deceased brother and this nephew's deceased father, help this nephew. It hasn't been easy for this nephew to be a governor. You look at how useless you are. Xuanqi was someone who could be persuaded by reason, but not cowed by force. After hearing Luo Shudao's words, he couldn't continue to get angry. He sighed and said, Forget it. This old man won't argue with you. Tell me, when will you let this old man go? This place of yours is filled with the stench of an official's prestige. This old man isn't used to it. Luo Shudao smiled and said, Look at what you're saying. If you want to leave, you can leave. Would this nephew dare to stop you? All right. Xuanqi turned his head and said, Daughter, call your Uncle Qin. Let's go. Luo Shudao hurriedly stopped him and said, Don't. Old man, you have to accompany Imperial Censor Huang for a meal and toast him before you leave. Xuanqi stomped his feet and sighed to the sky. Ai, if your old man was still alive, he would also be angered to death by you. A dignified governor without any backbone, being pushed around by a *T imperial censor like this. You've caused this old man to be humiliated along with you. Xuanqi broke into a run. After taking 2 steps and not seeing Luo Shudao following him, he angrily said, "What are you standing there for? Let's go." Luo Shudao asked curiously, "Where to?" Xuanqi roared, "Of course to accompany that bastard imperial censor for a meal." Luo Shudao said with a smile, "It's not lunchtime yet. You should take a rest and cool down. When the banquet is ready, I will invite you." Kaori angrily walked back. When he reached Luo Shudao's side, he angrily said, "You better remember this old man is only willing to swallow his anger because of you." Luo Shudao said repeatedly, "Yes, yes, yes. Young nephew will always remember old master's kindness in guiding me." Luo Shudao bowed deeply to the ground. When he looked up again, he only saw Kaori's but disappear into the door. Then, with a bang, the door closed. There was still a smile on Luo Shudao's face, but a layer of bitterness gradually seeped into his smile. Censor Huang said that he was willing to let them go because of me. The head of the smoky period said that he was willing to let them go because of me. I, Luo Shudao, really have a lot of face. In the evening, the people from the Qin family were released. Governor Luo personally escorted them back. It was rare that the head of the smoky period did not continue cursing at the top of his voice. Once he returned to the Chen family, he quietly returned to the back courtyard. Although he had only been invited by Luo Shudao to the governor's office to drink, he felt that he had lost all face. However, this was not his territory, and there was a limit to how much power he could throw around. There was also that Censor Huang. Although he was only an imperial censor and could be killed as easily as killing a chicken, Censor Huang had the backing of the imperial court. He had to be wary of him. Chun Deyu and his wife looked as if they had just survived a calamity. They were very glad that the Chun family had such an impressive in-law. Otherwise, they would not have been able to escape this calamity. After returning to the Qin family and tearing off the seals on the doors, Qin Deyu and his wife went to the head of the smoky period. No one paid attention to Luo Shudao in the Qin family, and he felt very uncomfortable. He paced in front of Kaori a few times, apologized, and then left in embarrassment. The Chen family and Kaori's people were all cursing Censor Huang in Kaori's room. No one noticed that little Xuelian had already left unhappily. Miss Xuelian squatted alone in the corner of the courtyard. Her skirt was pulled up to her knees, and she was plucking the wild grass and leaves one by one. She looked very bored. Yang Fan called out to her. Xuelian only raised her head and glanced at him. She continued to pout without saying a word. Yang Fan walked to her side and squatted down to look at her. He smiled and said, "Miss Xuelian, are you unhappy? You have the protection of the head of the smoky period, and no one dares to bully you. Why are you unhappy? It was a daunting experience, but not a dangerous one. You should be glad that you managed to return home safely." Xuelian plucked a leaf and gently twisted it in her hand until the green juice stained her slender fingers. She then said faintly, "But the Yang family members have been captured." "The Yang family members?" Yang Fan frowned and immediately realized that the Yang family members Xuelian was talking about were Yang Mingxing's clansmen. He asked curiously, "The Yang family members have also been captured? They were captured together with you? What kind of crime is this? Now that you have all been released, why are the Yang family members still locked up?" Xuelian shook her head and said, "I don't know. I am just a child. No one told me these things. I am very familiar with those who were captured. There are uncles and aunts. Although my mother married my father, they have always been very good to me. I am very sad to see them being captured." Yang Fan frowned and said, "Why didn't you ask the head of the smoky period to help rescue them?" Xuelian said in a low voice, "Although I didn't ask, I can see that it is useless to ask. The head of the smoky period does not want to say a word to that bad person. This time it was thanks to Governor Luo's help that my family was released. So even if I ask, the head of the smoky period will not help and will be scolded by my parents." Yang Fan said with a smile, "You speak as if you are a pitiful little girl. You are his daughter-in-law, not an outsider." Xuelian shook her head and said, "Mother said that although the head of the Yang family likes me very much, I cannot be spoiled. Mother is right. The head of the Yang family has more than 40 sons. If every one of them bothers him with their personal matters, how can he be the head of the clan?" Yang Fan was silent for a while and said softly, "Miss Xuelian, you are actually not a child anymore. You have already grown up." Yang Fan faintly felt uneasy. He had been in the Ministry of Justice for a long time and had a good understanding of the procedures and methods used by the 3 law divisions. The arrest of the Yang family members seemed very baffling. If one wanted to guess Huang Jingrong's motive, it seemed that he was only trying to expand the scope of the rebellion case. However, Yang Fan did not think so. Why would the Yang family members jump into Huang Jingrong's eyes? It could only be because of Yang Mingsheng. The Yang family members were so well off in Luoyang because of Yang Mingsheng, and they were forced to leave Luoyang because of Yang Mingsheng. Yang Mingsheng was a minister of the Ministry of Justice, and his current position was the #1 thug in the Ministry of Justice back then. At that time, the Ministry of Justice and the Censorate were fighting openly and covertly, and it was even more intense than now. Yang Mingsheng must have offended many people from the Censorate, so it was reasonable for Huang Jingrong to take revenge on the Yang family. However, what reason did he use to drag the Yang family, who were not thugs, into the rebellion case? Yang Fan immediately recalled that Zhou Xing had died for the crime of rebellion, and Yang Mingsheng was Zhou Xing's capable thug. It was obvious how Huang Jingrong was going to use this point. After figuring out this layer of relationship, Yang Fan immediately sensed that Huang Jingrong seemed to have found a breakthrough in the case. Those thugs could be killed. At this moment, Xuelian spoke again. The smoky period headman went to the banquet, and when he came back, he said angrily that the headmen of 2 tribes had been captured. They were 2 small tribes, and each tribe only had about 100 people. Because they were too small, they usually behaved themselves and never caused trouble. In the end, he accused them of being accomplices of the traitors. Governor Luo secretly told the smoky period headman that imperial censor Huang did this because the 2 tribes had looked down on him. The gifts from one tribe were too cheap, and they were all wild fruits that were not worth much. The other tribe didn't give any gifts at all. The tribe that gave the cheap gifts was actually too poor. The other tribe that didn't give any gifts relied on hunting for a living, and their tribesmen lived deep in the mountains and forests, like a group of half-savages. They thought that even if they didn't give any gifts, they wouldn't be noticed. In the end, when the smoky period headman talked about it, he got angry, but he still couldn't save them. He only scolded the imperial envoy for being greedy and vindictive, and said that he didn't have the demeanor of an imperial envoy at all. It's not that he didn't have any demeanor, but he wanted to gather enough evidence to kill them. Yang Fan's thoughts quickly turned. The original Zhou Xing's evil Yang clan members were the masterminds of this case, and the disgruntled thugs who were sentenced to exile were the accomplices. The 2 pitiful small tribes were bribed by them to prepare for the rebellion. Just like that, a case of rebellion was concocted. Yang Fan let out a long sigh and raised his head to look at the sky. It was already dusk, and it was impossible for Huang Jingrong to leave the city at this time, especially since Smoky had just returned from the banquet, which meant that Huang Jingrong had just ended the banquet. Tomorrow should be the day when Huang Jingrong wielded the butcher's knife, right? Yang Fan slowly stood up and looked over the courtyard wall at the mountain peak in the distance. The sun was setting, and the setting sun was like blood. Huang Jingrong's mood tonight was quite good. After the local officials and chieftains who attended yesterday's banquet found out about this imperial envoy Darren's refined hobby, early in the morning, they continuously sent over many yellow and white items and other rare treasures. The only flaw was that most of the officials had personally come to deliver the gifts, while the chieftains had mostly sent stewards to deliver them, which was somewhat disrespectful. In addition, there were also a few chieftains who did not care about him at all. They had not arrived, nor had they received the gifts. Huang Jingrong gritted his teeth and recorded them one by one in the counts. But in the afternoon, when the news of Smokey's capture spread, the people who came to deliver gifts came in an endless stream. There were even some people who had given him gifts in the morning who felt that their gifts were too light and gave him another one in the afternoon. As expected, they were lowly bastards who would not shed tears until they saw the coffin. He had originally decided to use that Fumiaki as a sacrifice, but after this person was captured, he immediately admitted defeat. Not only did he immediately send him a large sum of money, he even sent 2 enchanting and charming barbarian beauties to warm his bed. According to Luo Shu Dao, this person had some influence in the southwest. That old man was from Yaozhou and not a local. Letting him go could also use his mouth to spread his name throughout Yaozhou. This way, when he arrived in Yaozhou, he would not have to establish his might and subdue those who did not know what was good for them. Huang Jingrong returned from the banquet and first opened the chests. With a beaming smile, he picked up the gold, silver, and jewels, then locked them up one by one. Only then did he excitedly walk to his bedroom. Inside, there were 2 beauties as beautiful as flowers and jade waiting for him. When Huang Jingrong returned from the banquet, he first opened the chests one by one. Beaming with joy, he picked up the gold, silver, and jewels, then locked them up one by one. Only then did he excitedly walk to his bedroom. Inside, there were 2 beauties as beautiful as flowers and jade waiting for him. Waking up wielding a killing sword and drunk lying on the knees of beauties, this was almost every man's dream. It seemed that Huang Jingrong wanted to reverse the order. Tonight, drunk lying on the knees of beauties, waking up wielding a killing sword. Chapter 509. Early the next morning, there was a sudden downpour. The rain came and went quickly. The bean-sized raindrops connected into a line, brushing back and forth on the ground for half an hour. Then it suddenly stopped, and a round red sun leaped out of the clouds. After the clouds and rain stopped, the whole land was filled with a fresh smell. The trees and flowers were washed by the rain into a fresh green. The lotus flowers and lotus leaves in the small pond were covered with sparkling water droplets, looking delicate and beautiful. The frog jumped back onto the lotus leaf and croaked at the top of its lungs. A few red-tailed dragonflies quickly tapped on the surface of the water, creating small ripples. The sun shone through the clouds, illuminating the earth. It was a beautiful morning, and the weather was good. When Huang Jingrong got up from the bed, the 2 beautiful barbarian girls who had just been opened last night were still sleeping on the carved bed. Their beautiful faces were close to each other, as if they were 2 flowers on the same stalk. The 2 girls were only 13 or 14 years old and were at the age when they were thirsty for sleep. They couldn't get up earlier than Huang Jingrong, who was over 50 years old. Huang Jingrong touched the high buttocks of one of the girls and felt that it was smooth, tight, and bouncy. He raised his fingers and felt the pink and greasy skin on his fingertips. Huang Jingrong smiled with satisfaction and got up to change his clothes. After a wild night, when he got up, he felt that his waist was a little sore and his thighs were a little overexerted. He was getting old after all. Huang Jingrong sighed and decided to reduce the number of wild nights in the future. He paid great attention to his health. Anyway, it was food on his plate, so he could enjoy it slowly. Huang Jingrong asked a few maids to help him wash up and put on his clothes before walking out of the dripping eaves. It was raining hard in the room last night, but he didn't expect it to be the same outside. There were leaves on the ground that had been knocked down by the heavy rain, but even the fallen leaves were bright green under the sun and full of vitality. Huang Jingrong took a deep breath and smiled happily. The weather today was good, a good day to kill. When it was close to noon, Huang Jingrong and Luo Shudao led the troops out of the city. The pace of life in the small city was very slow, and people lived very leisurely. When they left the city, some people were still eating breakfast. Luo Shudao, who was riding on a horse, was fully armored. He looked majestic under the protection of the soldiers who were holding shiny sabers, spears, swords, and halberds. But his face was crooked, his eyes were wandering, and there was always a feeling of restlessness. He did not look as energetic as Imperial Censor Huang, who had picked 2 virgin flowers in a row last night. Huang Jingrong saw Luo Shudao's reaction and secretly sneered. She said with a hint of mockery, "Governor Luo seems to be somewhat unwilling. Could it be that you are still sympathizing with those rebels?" Luo Shudao laughed dryly and said reluctantly, "Not at all. If there are rebels who wish to harm the imperial court, then they are my mortal enemies." Imperial Censor Huang was well aware of Luo Yinyang's loyalty to the imperial court. However, Luo Shudao sucked in a deep breath and said, as if he had a toothache, "Imperial Censor Huang, among those people, there are many women, children, the elderly, and the young. It seems that even if someone is plotting a rebellion, it has nothing to do with them. Do you think we can let these people go?" The corner of Huang Jingrong's mouth twitched, and he said indifferently, "Governor Luo, are you questioning the impartiality of this imperial censor?" Luo Shudao hurriedly said, "I dare not. This lowly official just feels that those old, weak women and children—" Huang Jingrong snorted. "Those rebels, the old, weak women and children, also have different ideas. If we do not eliminate the roots of the weeds today, they will become a great threat to the imperial court in the future. For the sake of the world, how can we be soft-hearted?" Huang Jingrong coughed and said, "Under the heavens there is no land that belongs to the imperial court. Those who live on the land are the imperial court subjects. If there are people with different ideas, we will not let them off easily, even if they live in remote areas. Now that the sage has sent an army to recapture the 4 towns of Anchi, the Turks and Tubo have joined forces to resist. It is no different from hitting a rock with an egg." Luo Shudao was somewhat puzzled. He did not understand why Huang Jingrong brought up the war in the western region, but he heard Huang Jingrong said, "Wu Dao's de Zhongguan Wang Xiaojie has successively defeated more than 30,000 Tufan and Turkic elite troops at Cold Spring and Great Ridge. Han Xizhong, the commander of Broken Leaf Town, has also defeated over 10,000 Tubo elites led by Tubo's famous General Anai Shujin. Some of the western region's tribal chiefs, seeing that the Tubo's power is at an end, have sought refuge with our dynasty. It won't be long before Wang Xiaojie returns victorious. When the time comes, the sage will be free to deal with those troublemakers." Humph! What the sage hates the most is rebellion. He would rather suffer injustice than indulge rebels. "Governor Luo, you must investigate." Hearing this, Luo Shudao shuddered. An unfathomable smile hung on Huang Jingrong's face. She mocked, "Governor Luo, you and I are like old friends at our first meeting. This imperial censor has confided in you and talked so much with you. If it were someone else, this imperial censor would be too lazy to give him advice." Luo Shudao did not say anything. Huang Jingrong's undisguised threat infuriated him, but in the end he could not muster up the courage to oppose this imperial envoy. Luo Shudao could only vent his anger on the war horse he was riding. He lashed the horse ferociously and galloped forward. Looking at his back, Huang Jingrong let out a smile. Yang Fan had been following the army since they left the city, but halfway through, he took a shortcut and rushed ahead of the soldiers. Last night, he had chatted with Xuelian for a long time. Through Xuelian, he learned about Luo Shudao's character and some of his actions during the course of this matter. This made Yang Fan even more confident in stopping Huang Jingrong from committing murder today. Luo Shudao was only a somewhat cowardly bureaucrat. If he wanted to grasp power, he could not do so without the trust of the imperial court, and even more so without the support of the local authorities. He wanted to sit in this position steadily without offending the imperial court or the local authorities. Therefore, there was only one thing he had been doing all this time, balance. Of course, he did not want to use his men to start a massacre within his jurisdiction. However, most of the people to be killed were vagabonds. A small portion of them were officials' families that had lost their power, and 2 insignificant tribes. This was within Luo Shudao's acceptable range, which was why he obeyed Huang Jingrong. If Huang Jingrong went even further, he would rather offend Huang Jingrong than become the enemy of the people in Feng province, whom he relied on for survival. Yang Fan understood his mentality. He knew that as long as he revealed his identity, Luo Shudao would push the boat with the current and stay out of this matter, pushing him to fight against Huang Jingrong. This was the 3rd day since he arrived in Feng province. Although it was still a bit far-fetched to show himself now, it was still acceptable. He could just say that he had come along a shortcut. Who could count how many shortcuts there were in the mountainous region of Shu? Ahead of him was a meandering stream. The water was gurgling and was no more than knee-deep. Yang Fan arrived on horseback. He abruptly pulled on the reins and dismounted, splashing the stream water on the horse. When the horse's body was drenched and the water was dripping down its mane, Yang Fan untied the bridle and loosely tied his hair into a bun. He plucked a few strands of hair and let them hang on his cheeks. Then he splashed some water on his face. He looked travel-worn and dusty. A moment later, the man and horse galloped into the distance. The Cheongsi was not far away. The new provincial governor of Feng province had been in office for nearly 4 months. But in the eyes of the officials and people of Feng province, they had all ignored his existence. Many people didn't even know his name. This was the first thing that the officials and local people should know after a new official took office. People were so dismissive because they believed that this provincial governor would not last long. This provincial governor's surname was Zhang, and he was already 70 years old. In this era where officials had a lifetime tenure, it was not rare to see such an old official. What was rare was that such an old official would be sent out to undertake pioneering duties. The governor and provincial governor of Feng province were hereditary positions. The previous hereditary provincial governor happened to have no son after his death, so the imperial court took the opportunity to install a second-rate official, officially ending the hereditary system of the Feng provincial governor. However, the assistants of the provincial governor, such as the chief of staff, the minister of war, and the 6 military councillors, were not hereditary, but they were almost hereditary. They were all controlled by some of the smaller aristocratic families. None of the aristocratic families were willing to turn Feng province into a second-rate official system, allowing the imperial court to have a tighter control over them. Thus, they were all resistant to this first-rate provincial governor. They paid lip service, but secretly opposed him, hoping to push him away. An old man in his 70s shouldn't have been sent here to suffer, but this old Mr. Zhang was still sent here. From this, it could be seen that the Jiannan Path Observer was extremely displeased with this official. Most likely, they wanted him to suffer until he died. However, even though this provincial Governor Zhang was over 70 years old, he had a strong body and exuberant energy. Not only was he healthy, he was also scheming. You are not willing to report the actual situation to me? You are not willing to carry out my orders? You are trying to resist me? Fine. On the surface, old man Zhang hummed and groaned. Everything was easy to talk about, but in secret he made detailed records of everything the officials reported to him. He also made detailed records of every government order he issued to the various departments to carry out. The most insidious thing was that, while doing all this, the old man pretended to be sickly all day long, as though he was going to die at any moment. This made his subordinates even more excited. After being at the mercy of others as a puppet for 3 whole months, the old man was suddenly in high spirits. He was able to eat well, and his body was in excellent condition. He could even run 5 counties in one go without any effort. The old fellow began to make inspections of the various counties, checking the reports of the local magistrates for consistency, checking the implementation of the decrees he had issued, and removing the officials who were in trouble from their posts. But he could do nothing to shake the local government. If he were to send some people out of nowhere, they would all be turned into mere figureheads by the combined efforts of the local magistrates, the petty bureaucrats, the nobles, and the gentry. But in the 3 months that he was acting as a puppet, other than keeping accounts in a small notebook, he didn't do anything else. He sent his men to the various counties to find out which influential local celebrities were at odds with the current officials, and some even had a grudge against them. After finding out that there were problems, right after he dismissed the previous official, he immediately appointed his successor, all of whom were enemies of the previous official. The previous official was also a local celebrity, so he wouldn't suffer the full resistance of the entire region. The previous official and successor had a grudge against each other. This was enough to ensure that these new officials would carry out his orders to the greatest extent possible. This move of his couldn't immediately bring the entire region under the control of the imperial court, but it was enough to shake the power of the region. Conquering it was only a matter of time. Governor Zhang had just returned from a few of the most important counties when he heard that Governor Luo Shudao had accompanied the imperial envoy and a large number of soldiers to the Cheongsi to quell the rebellion. Governor Zhang was both shocked and angry. He knew very well what kind of people the censorate were. Slandering people for rebellion? He wanted to kill someone right under his nose? How could that be? In particular, some of these people were members of Li Tang's imperial clan who had survived, and old Mr. Zhang considered himself to be a loyal subject of Li Tang. Old Mr. Zhang had just entered his residence. After hearing the news, he didn't say anything else and immediately galloped out of the provincial governor's residence, rushing toward the Cheongsi like an arrow. This provincial governor's health was really good. He was already 70 years old, but when he reached the edge of the Cheongsi, he was only slightly out of breath. At the edge of the Cheongsi, the soldiers were arranged in a fan-shaped formation, forcing the commoners to turn their backs to the Cheongsi. Old Mr. Zhang whipped his horse with all his might. The war horse under him let out a long neigh and suddenly increased its speed, charging straight toward the soldiers. "Stay your blade! Stay your blade!" Old Mr. Zhang urged his horse to gallop as he shouted loudly. A few soldiers raised their sabers and spears and shouted sternly, "Halt!" The old man's hair was like snow, fluttering in the wind. His voice was even louder than theirs as he shouted, "Zhang Genji, the provincial governor of Peng, is here. Who dares to stop me? All of you, stand down." Zhang Genji urged his horse forward. When the soldiers heard that the provincial governor of Peng had arrived, they didn't dare to be rash and hurriedly moved to the left and right. Zhang Genji urged his horse forward until he was in front of Luo Shudao and Huang Jingrong. He reined in his war horse and stomped heavily on the ground, sending up a cloud of yellow sand. Zhang Genji glared at him and shouted, "How dare you? You dare to use rebellion as an excuse to slaughter innocent people." Huang Jingrong's face darkened. She turned her head and asked Luo Shudao, "Who is this old man?" Luo Shudao replied awkwardly, "Zhang Genji is the provincial governor of Peng." He leaned forward and said in a low voice, "His name is Zhang Genji. He was just demoted from the capital 2 years ago. Has censor Huang heard of his name?" Huang Jingrong let out a soft, "Ah," and suddenly remembered this person. The phrase, "great talents mature slowly," was simply the best portrayal of Zhang Genji. After Zhang Genji passed the Jinshi examination, he was appointed as the Qingyuan County Magistrate, an 8th-rank official. His starting point was not low, but he had been in the position for a long time. He had been working as a county magistrate until he was 63 years old and had never been promoted. When he was 64 years old, Wu Zetian was fully prepared to wear the imperial robe. She began to promote external officials without restraint, replacing officials that she didn't like. Zhang Genji also entered the capital as one of the candidates. After the imperial examinations, Wu Zetian was very satisfied with him and appointed him as the supervising censor. Not long after, he was promoted to Renren of the Phoenix Pavilion. During the early Tang dynasty, the Renren of the Phoenix Pavilion, Renren of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, entered the pavilion and issued edicts. He was the one who carried all the memorials. The Phoenix Pavilion was the place with the power to issue orders. The position of the Renren of the Phoenix Pavilion was similar to that of Yang Fan, the director of the Ministry of Justice. In the Ministry of Justice, he had great power. Wu Zetian clearly wanted to put him, an official who had been depressed under Li Tang's rule, in an important position. She wanted to train him as her confidant. However, Zhang Jianji regarded himself as a loyal official of Li Tang and didn't listen to Wu Zetian at all. He disagreed with many of Wu Zetian's decrees and used the Phoenix Pavilion's right to refute them. He overruled them one by one. Empress Wu was furious and demoted him. Huang Jingrong was at the imperial censorate at that time and knew about these things. Thus, she had heard of Zhang Jianji's name. This person even dared to disobey the empress's decree. Huang Jingrong was a little surprised when she heard it was him. However, on second thought, he was an imperial envoy and Zhang Jianji was only a provincial governor. There was no need to be afraid of him, so she calmed down. Chapter 510. Huang Jingrong's face darkened and he said, "Provincial Governor Zhang, this imperial envoy has arrived at the Feng Prefecture. As the provincial governor of this prefecture, you did not come to welcome me. This is already lacking in etiquette. Today, the imperial envoy is investigating the case of the rebels. Yet you are interfering. What is your intention?" Zhang Jianji sneered. "The imperial envoy has already decided to execute all the rebels. Let me ask, where are the testimonies? Where is the evidence of their rebellion? Who is the mastermind? Who is the accomplice? Who is the accomplice? Where are the armors, weapons, supplies, money, and rations? Could it be that the rebels that the imperial envoy is talking about are these scantily clad, emaciated women and children?" Hundreds of old people, children, and women huddled together, shivering under the gleaming swords and spears. This is the rebel party that is plotting to rebel? Just a group of people would be able to kill them all. Would such a group of people want to rebel? Under Zhang Jianji's righteous and stern questioning, the weapons in the hands of the soldiers gradually lowered. Huang Jingrong was enraged and shouted, "This official is following the imperial court's orders to inspect the rebels. How I decide the case is my business. It is not up to you, Zhang Jianji, to interfere." Zhang Jianji said tit for tat, "The imperial court has appointed me as the provincial governor of Feng Prefecture. As a parent, since this matter involves the people of this prefecture, this provincial governor has the right to interfere." Huang Jingrong disdainfully took out the imperial edict from his bosom and held it high in his hand. He shouted sternly, "This imperial envoy has the imperial edict in hand. Why are you all still not making a move? Are you also planning to rebel? Kill them all! Kill them all! Who dares?" Zhang Jianji drew his sword and roared, "Whoever dares to make a move will have to step over this old man's dead body." The officials under Zhang Jianji were old people who had been by his side since he was the district magistrate of Qingyuan County. They were loyal and devoted to him. Even though there was an army in front of them, they showed no fear. They all drew their swords and stood in front of him to protect him. Luo Shudao saw that both sides were at daggers drawn and quickly persuaded. "Imperial Censor Huang, Provincial Governor Zhang, please calm down. If there is anything, we can talk it out." Huang Jingrong angrily glared at him and said, "Governor Luo, this imperial envoy is investigating a case by imperial decree. As this prefecture's governor, you have the responsibility to assist me. Quickly chase this old man away and execute him immediately." Zhang Jianji also glared angrily at Luo Shudao and berated, "Governor Luo, you eat the blood of the people and receive support from one side. Yet you can't ensure the safety of one side and protect the people of one side. Instead, you're helping the evildoer do evil. Aren't you ashamed?" Luo Shudao was caught in a dilemma. Of course, he didn't like Huang Jingrong pointing fingers here, but he was even more afraid of the imperial envoy pulling him in. Wasn't this Zhang Jianji sent by the imperial court to seize power while the former provincial governor of Feng province had no sons and ignored the pleas of his nephews? If he made a mistake and gave the imperial court an excuse, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't end up in the same situation. After all, Huang Jingrong had the imperial court standing behind her. Thinking up to this point, Luo Shudao steeled his heart and shouted in a deep voice, "Imperial Messenger Huang is the imperial envoy. I will naturally carry out his orders. Men, act according to the imperial envoy's orders." Once the soldiers saw the governor give the order, they immediately pressed forward with their spears in hand. Immediately, miserable cries rang out from the crowd. Zhang Jinji trembled all over and desperately brandished his long sword to stop them. The soldiers didn't fight with him either, leaving only a dozen or so people to surround Zhang Jinji and his subordinates with their spears, forcing them into the center. They allowed Zhang Jinji's long sword to slash at their own spears. They didn't advance or retreat, only focused on stopping them. Zhang Jinji shouted in despair, "Don't attack! You guys are so heartless. Huang Jingrong, this old man wants to sue you. Luo Shudao, this old man wants to sue you." Luo Shudao turned his face to look elsewhere, pretending not to hear anything. Huang Jingrong curled her lips and smiled. "All of you stop. The imperial envoy is here." Those soldiers raised their butcher knives, and just as they were about to start killing, a loud shout suddenly exploded like spring thunder. A date red horse suddenly dashed out of the forest, and a person sat upright on the horse, holding a roll of yellow silk in his hand. Yang Fan had actually arrived earlier than them and had been hiding in the forest at the side. The terrain of the Qiongxi was uneven, and there were all kinds of hills and short mountains that were covered with vegetation. The group of people had been arranged to stay in an open space between two hills. Yang Fan saw that Huang Jingrong was about to kill and wanted to appear to stop him. However, Zhang Jinji rushed over from afar and passed right in front of the forest where Yang Fan was hiding. Yang Fan heard Zhang Jinji yell for him to stop, so he paused and wanted to see what was going on. If there was someone else who could stop the killing, he wouldn't be in such a hurry to act. When Zhang Jinji rushed in front of Huang Jingrong, the two of them exchanged a few words. Yang Fan was too far away and couldn't hear clearly, but just from his actions, he knew that this official wanted to stop Huang Jingrong from killing. Seeing that this official couldn't stop Huang Jingrong from killing, Yang Fan spurred his horse and rushed out. Suddenly the soldiers saw a rider dashing out of the thicket and immediately raised their guard. But hearing his loud voice and seeing that he was alone, they did not stop him. They did not release any arrows to kill him. They only stepped aside to make a path for him to come near. When Yang Fan arrived within 3 zhangs from Luo Shudao and Huang Jingrong, he was stopped by a spear and could not go any further. In a loud voice, Yang Fan said, "I am the Minister of Justice of the great Zhou Yang Fan. I have received an imperial order to be the inspector of the various paths, to investigate the case of the various paths Lu people's rebellion. There is insufficient evidence in the case of the Lu people's rebellion. I'm afraid there is more to it than meets the eye. Human life is at stake. This cannot be a child's play. I want to reopen the case. We will talk about it again when we have concrete evidence." Huang Jingrong recognized Yang Fan. As soon as she saw him suddenly appear in front of her, she was really startled. She also saw that he was alone, dressed in ordinary clothes. Both man and horse were drenched in sweat. She could not help but feeling suspicious. "Yang Longzhong," she shouted, "where did you come from?" Yang Fan sat upright on his horse and said in a loud voice, "There is a rumor that the various paths Lu people are responding to each other by raising their flags and rebelling. The sage sent the imperial censors out of the capital to investigate, but was afraid that they would overcorrect and kill the innocent. Therefore, he sent Yang Fan out of the capital to rectify the mistake and investigate the traitors, to put them in jail, to show the sage's mercy." Huang Jingrong was puzzled. You are wearing casual clothes. You look like you are in a sorry state. You do not have any guards of honor. You do not have any entourage. Why is that?" Yang Fan said, "I received an imperial order to leave the capital and escort Princess Taiping to Chang, and to worship the ancestors. However, I was entrusted by the sage. I did not dare to tarry. Therefore, as soon as I escorted the princess to Chang'an, I immediately rushed here on horseback, taking small paths the whole way. I was travel-worn. Even my bodyguards were left behind." Hearing this, Huang Jingrong immediately found a loophole in his words. "If that's the case," she questioned, "Sire has just arrived. How can you be sure that there is a discrepancy in my verdict?" Yang Fan calmly said, "It's very simple. As soon as I arrived at the capital, I went to the governor's mansion and the provincial governor's mansion to seek an audience with the local senior officers. Coincidentally, there were people complaining of injustice. Moreover, they were 2 children. I asked them a few questions and found out that there is something fishy about the case." Huang Jingrong was about to ask again when Yang Fan raised the imperial edict in his hand. With a smile that was not a smile, he said, "Imperial Censor Huang seems to be suspicious of my identity and intention in coming here. I wonder if Governor Luo and Provincial Governor Zhang are here? Please examine my imperial edict." When Zhang Jianji was demoted from the capital, Yang Fan was still a lowly soldier in the palace. Zhang Jianji did not recognize him, but upon hearing that he was an imperial envoy and seeing that his attitude was that of protecting exiled people, Zhang Jianji was pleasantly surprised. Hastily, he dismounted from his horse, tidied his robe, and cupped his fists toward Yang Fan, saying, "I am Zhang Jianji, the provincial governor of Peng Province. Greet the heavenly imperial envoy." Seeing him dismounting from his horse, Yang Fan hastily dismounted as well. Stepping forward to help him up, he politely said, "So it is Envoy Zhang. Envoy, please rise. This must be our prefecture's Governor Luo, right?" As Yang Fan spoke, he purposely glanced sideways at Luo Shudao, who was fully armored. With the help of the guards, Luo Shudao dismounted from his horse and stepped forward to pay his respects. Seeing this, Huang Jingrong could only dismount unwillingly. Luo Shudao and Zhang Jianji unfolded Yang Fan's commission and read it carefully. The seal was stamped without error. Zhang Jianji glanced at Huang Jingrong and said, "Would Imperial Censor Huang also let me take a look at the commission?" Huang Jingrong angrily said, "Isn't it enough to have Governor Luo as a witness?" Zhang Jianji solemnly said, "How can we be careless when it comes to state affairs? Even if I am familiar with Sire, the documents that should have been checked should have been checked." Huang Jingrong angrily took out his commission from his sleeve and flung it to Zhang Jianji. Zhang Jianji unfolded it and immediately discovered the problem. Actually, Zhang Jianji did not suspect Huang Jingrong's identity. He only wanted to diminish his prestige. Unexpectedly, when he unfolded the imperial edict, there was only the emperor's imperial seal and not the seal of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Zhang Jianji couldn't help but be furious and shouted, "If the order doesn't come out of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, what kind of imperial edict is it?" Huang Jingrong was shocked and angry. He said, "How dare you? The sage's imperial seal is on it. You dare to say that this isn't an imperial edict? Zhang Jianji, are you rebelling?" Zhang Jianji boldly said, "If the order doesn't come out of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, it is chaos. I don't recognize your identity as the imperial envoy. This is according to the laws and regulations of the state. Imperial Censor Huang, don't randomly accuse me." Zhang Jianji dared to say this because he really had something to rely on. The power of the Tang and Song emperors was not unrestricted. The highest state decree of the Tang dynasty was called Imperial Edict. The Hall of Governmental Affairs issued the decree. After the emperor agreed, he wrote the word Imperial Edict and then sent it to the Ministry of Governmental Affairs. If the Ministry of Governmental Affairs objected, it was more powerful than the emperor's opinion. It had to state the reason clearly, and the Ministry of Governmental Affairs had to rewrite the edict. This was called alteration. Even if it was approved by the Ministry of Governmental Affairs, it still had to be sent to the Ministry of Governmental Affairs. The Ministry of Governmental Affairs had jurisdiction over the 6 departments of rights, arms, punishment, and works. The Ministry of Governmental Affairs added the seal and sent it to the corresponding yamen to execute. Without the seal of the Ministry of Governmental Affairs, although it wasn't a fake imperial edict, it wasn't legal. The officials at all levels had the right not to execute it. The reason was like this. The law was also like this. There were very few people who dared to ignore the emperor. However, this Zhang Jianji happened to be one of them. When he was in Jing, he dared to directly refute the emperor's edict, let alone here. The two of them immediately began to argue about Wu Zetian's imperial edict that didn't have the seal of the Ministry of Governmental Affairs. Huang Jingrong wanted to reason with Zhang Jianji, but how could she argue against this old man? Huang Jingrong was pushed around by him until she couldn't restrain her anger. She could only turn to Luo Shudao for help. In a loud voice, she said, "Governor Luo, what do you say?" Luo Shudao was standing at the side. He had long seen through the situation. Under his rule, the refugees and tribesmen were unjustly killed. He instinctively felt conflicted. It was just that due to Huang Jingrong's status as an imperial envoy, he didn't have the courage to resist. Now, not only did Provincial Governor Zhang step out to refute it, an imperial envoy had also jumped out. The imperial edict he held was even more legitimate than Huang Jingrong's. Luo Shudao had an idea in his heart. The moment Huang Jingrong asked, Luo Shudao immediately replied in a righteous tone. This imperial edict of imperial censor, Huang, came from the hands of the saint. This imperial edict of Yang Langzhong also came from the hands of the saint. As long as it is the edict of the saint, Luo Shudao definitely has no reason to defy it. However, Luo Shudao's tone changed. His expression was still solemn, but the content of his words was very vulgar. This imperial edict of imperial censor, Huang, precedes Yang Langzhong's edict. This means that the saint also felt that there were some omissions in the previous edict. That's why he gave the edict to Yang Langzhong to remedy the situation. It is better for the two imperial envoys to discuss and come to a conclusion first. Chapter 511. Yang Fan and Zhang Jinji were adamant in their opposition. Luo Shudao was beating around the bush. Huang Jingrong was so angry that smoke was coming out of his nostrils. Unfortunately, he had no soldiers to use. What could he do? He wished he could jump off his horse and chop those people. But looking at the situation, not only was Yang Fan not to be trifled with, even that damned old man with snow-white hair and beard was trained in swordsmanship. If they were to really fight, he might not be their match. Just like the heavy rain that came and went in a hurry this morning, Huang Jingrong came quickly and left quickly. He vented all his anger on the horse he was riding. He whipped it again and led his subordinates farther and farther away from the main group. Zhang Jianji sat steadily and gently stroked his beard. Looking at the back of Huang Jingrong, he slowly said, "Imperial censor Huang still hasn't given up." Yang Fan said, "What can he do if he doesn't give up?" Zhang Jinji smiled slightly. From Yang Fan's fluffy hair, sweat-stained face, to his collar, lapel, and boots, he looked very carefully. When he was done, he glanced at him meaningfully and slowly said, "Fortunately, Yang Langzhong arrived in time. Otherwise, this old man would not have been able to stop him." Yang Fan urged his horse forward. Out of the corner of his eye, he was watching Zhang Jianji's every move. He knew that Zhang Jianji was sizing him up. He smiled slightly and said, "How can there be so many coincidences in the world? To tell you the truth, Junior had already arrived 3 days ago." Zhang Jianji was slightly moved and said, "Oh, if that is the case, why did Yang Langzhong not get in touch with Governor Luo? Why is there such a danger today?" Yang Fan said, The Imperial Envoy platform has a fierce reputation. Junior knew that they would cause trouble this time. Therefore, after receiving the Imperial Edict, Junior was deeply worried and wanted to rush here as soon as possible. However, the Emperor also issued an edict, ordering me to escort Her Highness to Chang. During this journey, when I arrived here, I could only collect Lu Ren's corpse. Zhang Piao was a shrewd old man, so he immediately understood the Empress' true intentions the moment he heard these words. He also heard the complaint in Yang Fan's words. Yang Fan said, "The princess is merciful and knows what's on my mind." So, after entering the inner pass, the princess ordered me to go ahead. Because of this, I didn't bring my subordinates. This is, after all, a violation of the rules. Since Huang Jingrong didn't make a move, I didn't show myself. Rules, Zhang. Genji narrowed his old eyes and gently stroked his beard. He pondered over this word, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He looked at Yang Fan and said, "I think that all rules should be for a good purpose. If you want to do a great deed of charity, and the rules become an obstacle, then the rules should be broken. What does Yang Longzhong think?" Yang Fan nodded slightly and said, "Junior deeply agrees. If the old rules are not suitable, and there will be chaos without rules, then the old rules should be broken and new rules should be established." Zhang, Genji chuckled as if he had met a confidant. His attitude towards Yang Fan immediately became closer. He said to Yang Fan, "In order to save the innocent people, Lang Zhong did not hesitate to disobey the Emperor's orders and traveled thousands of miles. You disregarded your own safety and your own future. Such righteousness, this old man admires it very much." Yang Fan bowed and said, "Mr. Zhang is too kind." Today, Mr. Zhang stood up for the people and resisted the Imperial Envoy. Your noble character and unquestionable integrity are truly worthy of admiration. However, I still have to ask Mr. Zhang to cover up the fact that Junior arrived 3 days early. These 3 days, Junior has been living in a private residence, including the 2 children who pulled the road and cried out for their innocence. It was actually Junior who saved them first. If Imperial Messenger Huang were to investigate, Zhang, Genji, raised his white eyebrows and said, "Since Lang Zhong spoke frankly, this old man here will definitely not let you reveal anything. It's just that this old man is currently in Wei Province and is desperately trying to open up a new situation. There are many people below me who are holding me back, and I can't display my full power for a while. If you want to cover up your tracks, you cannot do without Governor Luo's help." Yang Fan glanced at Luo Shudao, who was walking in front of him, and said with a smile, "As long as Sir Zhang agrees. This Yang is not worried about Governor Luo. Look at that man on the horse, he is clearly a fence-sitter. Even if he knows something, he won't say it. As long as he does not say anything, Huang Jingrong here is deaf and blind. What else can he do?" Zhang, Genji laughed involuntarily and said, "Although Yang Longzhong has only been here for a short period of time, you know this Governor Luo's temperament very well." Yang Fan said, "Junior's courtesy name is Yuan Fang, which was bestowed by Elder D. Junior respects Senior and calls me Mr. Zhang instead of your official position. If Mr. Zhang does not mind, then you can treat Yang Fan as your nephew." "Oh." Zhang, Genji heard that Yang Fan's courtesy name was bestowed by Di Renjia, and his attitude towards him changed again. He said cheerfully, "If that is so, this old man will be careless. Hee, Yuan Fang is young and promising, full of hot blood. This old man admires it very much." He casually swept his horsewhip and said somewhat sadly, "Actually, it is not only Luo Shudao now. How many officials do not pretend to be deaf and dumb and only care about protecting themselves?" With this kind of discussion, it meant that he really did not treat Yang Fan as an outsider. Massacring the vagrants was the Imperial Censorate's strategy to save themselves. But objectively speaking, it was beneficial to the Wu faction. Since Yang Fan desperately tried to stop it, it could not be the Wu faction. Moreover, hearing that he was appointed by Princess Taiping, Zhang Jianji felt even closer to him. Although Princess Taiping was the daughter of the current empress, she was also the princess of the previous dynasty, Li Tang. Since ancient times, children inherited the blood of their fathers. In the eyes of Zhang Jianji, who was a firm supporter of Li Tang, Princess Taiping was the royal family of Li Tang and would always be a member of Li Tang's royal family. Since Yang Fan was on the princess's side, naturally he was also a loyal official of Li Tang. Now that he heard that his courtesy name was bestowed by Di Renjie, he must be regarded as a nephew by Di Renjie. How could he not believe someone who was appreciated and trusted by Di Renjie? Therefore, a bold idea suddenly emerged in his mind, but this idea was really too risky. Although he had tried to probe, he could not completely understand Yang Fan's temperament and character. After a slight hesitation, he thought in his heart, "No, this idea is too bold. I have to test him." Therefore, the words that were on the tip of his tongue changed to a discussion. "But although I want to save people, I can only save one place, not others. I can save them for a while, but not forever. If these cruel officials are not eliminated, they will eventually become a scourge. What does Yang Langzhong intend to do?" Yang Fan slightly frowned, shook his head, and sighed. "I will do my best and leave it to fate. If I can save one person, I will save one person. If I can save 10 people, I will save 10 people. I will do my best to seek peace of mind. Otherwise, what else can I do?" Zhang Jianji softly sighed and murmured, "Yes. If I want to eliminate this trouble forever, the heavens will have to send down divine lightning and strike them alive. But will the heavens send down punishment?" After returning to the city, Luo Shudao strongly invited Yang Fan to stay in the military governor's residence, while Zhang Jianji invited him to stay in the provincial governor's residence. Yang Fan naturally chose the provincial governor's residence. Luo Shudao's expression was rather regretful, but he inwardly let out a sigh of relief. He also did not want the 2 imperial envoys to use his home as a fighting ring, causing him to be like a mouse in a bellows, being bullied on both sides. It was just that he still had to maintain a necessary posture. Following Yang Fan's request, Zhang Jinji only sent 2 people dressed in civilian clothes to accompany him to carry his luggage. In reality, Yang Fan did not have much luggage to carry. He only had a horse, and he had even ridden it out. He was going to fetch the 2 children hidden in the room. Yang Fan did not want his true identity to be known by the Qin family, so when he arrived not far from his residence, he had the 2 officials wait in the corner of the alley while he returned to the Qin family residence. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one in the courtyard, Yang Fan first brought out the 2 children and handed them over to the 2 officials, then returned to bid farewell to the Qin family. The only people in the Qin family who knew that Yang Fan was an old friend from the capital were Shui Lian and that old man. Shui Lian's mother had not seen Yang Fan when she was in Luoyang. At that time, Yang Fan was still a small fry and did not have the qualifications to chat with the doctor's wife or get to know her. His return this time was naturally to bid farewell to Shui Lian. Upon receiving the news, Shui Lian hurriedly ran out. When she saw Yang Fan, she said reluctantly, "Brother Yang, are you leaving?" Yang Fan nodded his head and said, "Yes. I'm not used to staying in the southwest, and I can't find a suitable job. I want to go somewhere else." Shui Lian bit her lip, and an extremely fine and faint hair appeared on her lip. "My father has a few stalls on Fish Market Street. If Brother Yang doesn't mind, I can talk to my father and have Brother Yang go there to be a waiter." "Thank you." Yang Fan bent down and smiled at her. "Thank you. I've already decided to leave. I'm very happy to see you again on this trip to Wei Province. I remember that Miss Shui Lian was very unhappy at that time. Your friends were only a few grasshoppers hiding under the lantern in the back garden, and sometimes you could only hide behind the rock garden to think about your troubles. Now, not only have you grown more and more beautiful, you are also very happy every day. I am happy for you." Shui Lian's eyes were filled with tears at Yang Fan's words. She sobbed, Brother Yang Fan smiled and said, "Okay, I have to go. This is a gift from brother before I leave. I wish you eternal happiness." Yang Fan took Shui Lian's small hand. Shui Lian only felt a coolness on her wrist as a pair of bracelets was put on her wrist. The bracelets were made of green and white jade. They were moist and sparkling, and the lines were smooth and smooth. The round bracelets symbolized happiness and good fortune. "Miss Shuelian, goodbye." Yang Fan waved his hand at her. Shuelian also raised her hand, which was wearing a jade bracelet. She reluctantly waved at him. The jade bracelet on her wrist made her arm look even more fair and soft. Sun Er, who was hiding in the shadows, lightly patted her chest. She was glad that her sister-in-law had not been abducted by that guy who didn't look like a good person. She turned around and looked at the 4 warriors in white standing behind her. She waved her hand and said, Okay, you can all leave. I've decided to let him go." Sun Er had decided to let Yang Fan go, but Sima Bai and Lu Junfan didn't think the same way. When Yang Fan left the Qin family and left with the 2 officials in civilian clothes, Sima Bai and Lu Junfan quietly stayed behind them. Lu Junfan nervously asked, "Brother, there are 5 of them. Why don't we let it go?" "You trash! Do those 2 children count as people?" Sima Bai was so angry that smoke was coming out of his nostrils. He angrily scolded, "Follow closely and prepare the lime." Chapter 512. Weizhou City was not very big, and the streets were even more messy. Even the main streets were occupied by vendors, and the originally spacious roads were now cramped and difficult to walk on. Merchants and travelers, as well as horses, cows, sheep, and all kinds of vehicles, filled the roads to the brim. Other than the bailiffs who would clear the path ahead of time for important officials to pass by and clear the path after the street was filled with chaos, it was useless at other times. No matter how loud one's roar was, the common people would just leisurely walk their own path and not pay any attention to them. Yang Fan was not in a hurry. He squeezed into the crowd with Gu Yuan and Yuan Huan and slowly walked forward. He even bought some snacks for the gluttonous little fellow and comforted Gu Yuan. "Don't worry, I'll take you to a high-ranking official's house to stay. Once you get there, you won't have to hide all day." Gu Yuan said yes. "Uncle Yang, we can stay anywhere. I'm just worried about Mom and Dad. Are they all right?" Yang Fan said, "After I settle you down, I'll go settle this matter. It won't be long before you can reunite with your families. I promise." Perhaps it was because of their similar fates in childhood, and especially because they were also siblings, Yang Fan was very close to them. He had probably transferred his longing for his sister to this pair of siblings. Yang Fan was unusually patient with this pair of siblings whom he had never met before. At this time, Lu Junfan, who was carrying a basket in the crook of his arm, had a scarf on his head and had a mustache stuck to his chin. He was dressed like an old farmer from the countryside. The 2 public servants were doing their best to clear the way, and Yang Fan was walking behind them with the Goose siblings. Lu Junfan suddenly dodged sideways, as if he had been hit by someone and cut right in between them. This situation was very normal. It was very common to see people jostling and bumping along the way, so Yang Fan did not pay it any mind. Lu Junfan nervously looked behind Yang Fan, and Sima Bai, who was behind Yang Fan, glared at him. Lu Junfan secretly gritted his teeth and subconsciously grabbed the basket and suddenly threw it at Yang Fan. "Uncle!" A cloud of lime flew out, but in her hurry, Lu Junfan did not have time to remove the cloth covering the basket. The cloth also flew out, blocking a part of the lime. Only a small part of Gu Yuan's body was sprinkled with lime, but her face was not affected at all. Yang Fan was talking to Gu Huan with his head lowered, so he didn't notice Lu Junfan's actions. However, Gu Huan saw it and shouted in surprise. Yang Fan suddenly looked up and saw a white mist in front of him. He subconsciously closed his eyes and reached out to block Gu Huan. Lu Junfan hurriedly threw the lime out of the basket and Yang Fan saw his actions the moment he closed his eyes. His empty left hand hurriedly pushed outwards and blocked most of the lime. A ball of lime bounced back and hit Lu Juanfan's face. Lu Juanfan's eyes were wide open, and the lime hit his head and face. His eyes were completely filled with lime, and Lu Juanfan immediately let out a scream. Sima Bai saw that Lu Juanfan had succeeded and quickly took out a sharp knife from his sleeves. He stepped forward and twisted his waist, stabbing towards Yang Fan's back. Yang Fan had one hand protecting Gu Huan and the other pushing away the lime. His body very naturally leaned to the side, and Sima Bai's knife was not solid enough. The knife grazed past Yang Fan's shoulder blade. Yang Fan felt a sharp pain in his body, and even though his eyes were closed, his reaction was still extremely fast. His body fell forward, and his right leg bounced back. He heard a muffled grunt from behind him, and this kick landed on Sima Bai's chest. However, in his haste, he did not use all his strength. Even so, he still managed to kick Sima Bai into the crowd, knocking down a bunch of people. The two bailiffs in front heard the noise, and when they saw this scene, they couldn't help but be shocked and angry. They immediately roared and pounced towards Sima Bai. Sima Bai spat out a mouthful of blood and struggled to get up. He clutched his chest and staggered away. The street was extremely crowded, and Sima Bai weaved in and out of the crowd and actually managed to escape. In the provincial governor's manor, Zhang Jianji had his hands behind his back, and his expression was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the hall. The unlucky Lu Juanfan had been caught, and Zhang Jianji had already asked him about the origins of the assassin. Knowing that it was not another assassin sent by the imperial envoy, the anger and nervousness in Zhang Jianji's heart had lessened somewhat. However, Yang Fan was currently receiving treatment, and he didn't know if his eyes would be burnt blind, which still made him very worried. Luo Shudao still did not know that the imperial envoy had met with danger. If he knew, he would definitely fly into a rage at this moment. An imperial envoy had met with an accident in his territory, and this was a responsibility he could not bear. Of course, at this moment, Yang Fan was Zhang Jianji's guest, so Zhang Jianji had to bear even more responsibility. After a long time, the doctor finally came out from the inner room, and behind him was his little disciple, who was carrying a medicine box on his back. Zhang Jianji hurriedly went forward and cupped his hand, saying, "Mr. Wen, how is this old man's nephew's injury?" Because this matter was of great importance, Zhang Jianji did not reveal Yang Fan's identity to the doctor, and only said that he was his nephew. Mr. Wen was younger than Zhang Jianji by more than 20 years, nearing the age of 50. His appearance was even younger, appearing to be in his early 40s. Hearing the provincial governor's question, the scholarly physician hastily bowed to return the courtesy and replied, "Mr. Wen need not worry. Your nephew's eyes were not splashed with too much lime. I have already washed them with vegetable oil and applied some herbal medicine. Presumably, his eyes will not have any serious problems. However, his eyes are currently burnt, red and swollen, temporarily unable to see anything." Zhang Jianji heard this, and immediately heaved a sigh of relief. The scholarly physician continued, "The injury on his back is also not serious. It did not injure any vital parts and has already been bandaged. As for the younger child, the lime splashed on his eyes was even less than Mr. Wen's. He will be fine after washing his eyes and resting for a while." Zhang Jianji cheerfully said, "Someone, come quickly and fetch 2 silver cakes. This is Mr. Wen's medical fee." Mr. Wen hastily said, "Mr. Wen must not. This medical fee is too heavy." Zhang Jianji said, "Hey, Mr. Wen was able to preserve my nephew's eyes. 2 silver cakes are nothing in comparison." The steward fetched the silver cakes. Zhang Jianji said, "Steward, help me escort Mr. Wen out. Mr. Wen, this old man wants to see my nephew's condition. I won't be escorting you out." Stay. Mr. Wen repeatedly cupped his hands and followed the steward out. In the inner room, Yang Fan's face was wrapped in several circles of bandages. He was using his hands to feel the furniture and slowly moving his body. Suddenly, he heard footsteps and turned around. Zhang Jinji quickly stepped forward and supported his hand, saying, "Yuan Feng, don't worry. Mr. Wen is a famous doctor in this area. He said that your eyes will be fine. You will be fine after 2 days of rest." Yang Fan calmly nodded his head and said, "Junior has heard Mr. Wen's words. Don't worry, Master Zhang. I can feel it myself. The injury shouldn't be serious. It's just a bit of a burn." Yang Fan was still young. He was only in his early 20s, but he was already a Justice Department official. Compared to this 63-year-old Zhang Jianji, who was squatting in the yamen as a second-in-command, Yang Fan's future prospects were boundless. If Yang Fan's eyes were suddenly blinded, everything would be for naught. No one would be able to withstand this kind of stimulation. When Yang Mingxing's eyes were suddenly blinded, his intense reaction and twisted mentality were normal reactions. Zhang Jinji couldn't help but secretly admire Yang Fan's calmness. Yang Fan asked, "Did you catch the culprit?" Zhang Jinji said, "Yuan Feng's attack was able to deflect the lime thrown by the assassin, but his own eyes were also hit by the lime, so he had no choice but to surrender. Just now the old man has already interrogated him. This man said that he is called Lu Junfan, and that he and Yuan Feng are old acquaintances, and that there was a grudge between them in Luoyang." Lu Junfan. Yang Fan tilted his head and thought for a moment. He said with some surprise, "It's him? I didn't expect to run into him here." "No wonder." Zhang Jinji said, "Just now, one of the scholar's disciples helped him wash his eyes with vegetable oil. However, there was too much lime splashed into his eyes. This person is already blind." Yang Fan was silent for a moment. He asked, "How does Master Zhang intend to deal with him?" Zhang Jinji said, "Killing an official is equivalent to rebellion. He should be executed. However, when he tried to assassinate you, he didn't know your identity. Moreover, the assassination attempt failed. He should be sentenced to exile." Zhang Jinji laughed bitterly. He said, "But this place is already a remote province. Where else can he be exiled to? Now he can only be locked up in prison." Yang Fan said, "That's fine. Otherwise, with his eyes already blinded, I'm afraid he'll starve to death outside." Yang Fan thought for a moment. He asked, "He seems to have an accomplice?" Zhang Jinji said, "That's right. According to Lu Junfan, after he was exiled to this place, he stayed here and joined a group that specializes in selling banned goods between our dynasty and Tubo. Their leader is called Sima Bai. Sima Bai has already escaped. I've sent people to capture him." Yang Fan nodded. "Thank you, Master Zhang." Zhang Jinji said, "You should rest first. Now that something like this has happened, should we postpone the discussion with Imperial Censor Huang about the rebellion until your eyes have recovered?" Yang Fan said, "There's no need. It's only his eyes that are injured, not his mouth. We can't give him time to play tricks. Master Zhang, it's better to arrange it according to the original schedule." Zhang Jinji sighed. "All right, this old man will arrange it immediately. You should rest first." Zhang Jinji came out of Yang Fan's room and went to the front hall. He beckoned for the steward and asked in a low voice, "Have you found Sima Bai's whereabouts?" The steward was a family member he brought with him when he took office. He was his trusted aide who had taken care of him since he was young. He quickly replied, "Wei province is only this big. Where else can Sima Bai run to? We've already found his whereabouts." Zhang Jinji was surprised. "So fast? I didn't expect the prefectural magistrate to have some tricks up his sleeve." The steward chuckled. "Ah Lang, you've removed 5 county magistrates in a row. Your name has spread throughout Wei province. The petty officials have the best eyes and ears. They've already heard about Ah Lang's return. They're now trembling with fear, afraid that Ah Lang will cause trouble for them. How can they not work hard? Moreover, Yang Fan is the imperial envoy. If the imperial envoy is assassinated here, the emperor will be furious and investigate. At worst, a Lang will be relieved of his official post and go home, but they will certainly be beheaded. These local bullies usually do nothing, but once they do something, nothing can escape their eyes. Zhang Jianji nodded. This is why I want to subdue them and not remove them. If they're useless and only listen to orders, how can they help me govern? Tell them to keep an eye on Sima Bai, but don't arrest him. The steward felt strange and asked, this person actually dared to assassinate the imperial envoy. This is a heinous crime. Why didn't Lang arrest him? Could it be he has accomplices? Zhang Jianji shook his head. If he has accomplices, he wouldn't be so desperate. I have another use for him. Remember, don't kill him or arrest him. Chapter 5:13. That day, Imperial Censor Huang felt very sullen. When he woke up in the morning, he was still very happy. After sharpening his killing sword in the Peach Blossom Cave all night, he woke up feeling refreshed. He had planned to show off his might on the vagabonds in one go and recreate the scene of the peach blossoms from last night. He did not expect that when he chopped down with his sword, he would chop out a hot-headed youth who dared to challenge the Empress. Fortunately, he had the imperial edict in his hands, so the crafty Luo Shudao did not dare to not yield. However, Zhang Jianji had just been kicked to the side when Yang Yuanfang, who was also carrying an imperial edict, jumped out. Huang Jingrong did not curse anymore and angrily returned to the military governor's office. He had just boiled a pot of black tea in the afternoon and had not calmed down when the white-haired Zhang Jianji supported Yang Fan to find trouble with him. When he first saw Yang Fan blindfolded, Huang Jingrong was very surprised. When he found out that Yang Fan had encountered an assassin, he immediately rejoiced in his misfortune. His only regret was that the assassin's knife was slightly crooked and did not really stab Yang Fan to death. However, when he saw Yang Fan's unlucky appearance, Huang Jingrong was still very happy. Unfortunately, his happy mood did not last long. It was soon destroyed by Yang Fan and Zhang Jianji's incessant questioning, as well as Luo Shudao's bad performance as a fence-sitter. Yang Fan had been in the Ministry of Justice for a long time and knew the judicial process like the back of his hand. Although his eyes were inconvenient, he did not need them at this moment. It was enough as long as his mouth could still speak. Yang Fan questioned them one by one through the legal process, but Huang Jingrong simply enforced the law, violently and hastily closed the case. He only wanted to have a perfect explanation to satisfy the emperor. He never thought that someone would question his interrogation process. His interrogation process and closing the case were full of loopholes. He could not defend himself against Yang Fan's questioning. Zhang Jianji had been a county magistrate for many years. Now that he was the provincial governor of a province, he was in charge of the administrative affairs of a province. He was not a layman when it came to justice. However, when Yang Fan questioned him on this aspect, he focused on how the refugees behaved themselves locally. He listed the number of refugees, especially the ratio of men, women, old and young, to prove how ridiculous it was to accuse them of rebelling. Yang Fan and Zhang Jianji were overbearing, while Luo Shudao was, as usual, slacking off. Huang Jingrong was being bombarded by Yang Fan and Zhang Jianji's questions, one after another. The most infuriating thing was that there was still a bystander watching him make a fool of himself. It was unknown if Censor Huang, who had such a psychological shadow, would still be in the mood for a threesome tonight. In just one afternoon, Huang Jingrong was utterly defeated. Finally, with Zhang Jianji's proposal and Luo Shudao's abstention, Yang Fan's approval, they decided to release the Lu people back to their place of residence, only sending a small number of soldiers to guard the perimeter to prevent them from escaping and re-examining the evidence of their rebellion. Huang Jingrong was at her wit's end. The injury to Yang Fan's eyes was indeed not serious. His reaction was fast enough. The moment Lu Junfan threw out the lime, he had already closed his eyes. Dr. Wen then used vegetable oil to clean his eyes and applied medicine. By nightfall, the burning pain was greatly reduced. Early the next morning, Dr. Wen rushed to the provincial governor's Fu to check on his injuries and change the medicine for him. Although Yang Fan's eyes were still red and swollen, he could already see with some difficulty. Yang Fan impatiently blindfolded his eyes so that he could not see anything. After obtaining Dr. Wen's approval, he removed the bandages. However, he still had to do his best to stay in a dark place to avoid strong light. At this time, dozens of horses were parked in front of Chun Deyu's house. The head of the white barbarians, Xuanqi, was planning to return to Yao province. During this trip to Wei province, he had been extorted and extorted. This local despot of the white barbarians felt that he had lost all face. Chen Diu knew that this headman was not in a good mood and did not dare to ask him to stay. Fumijai had already mounted his horse. Sun Er was still whispering to Xue Lian in a corner, "Little sister-in-law, I'll come see you in a few days. When you marry into my family next spring, the two of us will be together every day. At that time, I'll take you to sing folk songs and see the Arai Lake." The Fumijai headman impatiently urged, All right, it's time to go. You girl, you talk too much." Sun Er stuck out her tongue at Shuolian and said, "Then I'll go." The horse bell rang, and the Fumijai headman's group gradually disappeared from the alley. Qin Dahai looked at their distant figures and sighed softly. He said to his wife, "I plan to take care of the business here. In the future, we should move to Yao province. It'll be closer to the Fumijai headman and we'll be able to take care of each other. I also feel that there's nothing to miss in Wei province. Most of our family's business can be done in Yao province. Furthermore, with the headman's care, we can do even better. We can just sell off the stalls on the street of the fish market. We only have one daughter. If we move there, we'll be able to see her often." The couple discussed among themselves as they returned to the courtyard. In the martial manner, Huang Jingrong instructed his two new concubines with a dark expression, "Hurry up and pack your things. We're leaving." Seeing his dark expression, the two ladies didn't dare to say anything and hurriedly returned to the inner chamber to pack their belongings. Placing his hands behind his back, Huang Jingrong paced back and forth in the hall. The more he thought about it, the more hatred he felt. He couldn't help but curse. This is truly an unlucky year. There's so many people leaving the capital. But why do I have to be targeted by this plague doctor? Humph! I can't afford to offend you, but can't I just hide from you? If you have the guts, follow me to Jiannan. Huang Jingrong was gleeful at the thought, and he laughed savagely. I'll be wasting my time with you then. As long as you keep your eyes on me, my colleagues in the Imperial Censorate will be able to achieve their goals elsewhere. At that time, my Imperial Censorate will make a comeback and regain His Majesty's trust. Then, we'll slowly deal with an ignorant brat like you. Old Huang really couldn't stay in Wei Province any longer. The news that there was another Imperial envoy in Wei Province, and that he was not on good terms with the previous one. The common people did not know about it, but the officials and the chieftains knew it very well. As a result, Huang Jingrong's front door was deserted and there were few carriages and horses. Everyone was watching the situation, waiting for the two imperial envoys to decide who was better. In truth, Huang Jingrong was already at a disadvantage in the first round. If this was the capital or the territory controlled by the Imperial Censorate, he could still make use of torture and fabricate evidence of treason. However, this was Wei province, and the only thing he could rely on was the imperial edict. With the arrival of Yang Fan, his only advantage was gone. Since he couldn't kill him, he couldn't accept his gifts, and his dream of gathering the beauties of the southwest had been shattered. What was the point of him remaining here? Thus, Huang Jingrong decisively decided to leave. He knew that Yang Fan's target wasn't just him, but the entire Imperial Censorate. If Yang Fan kept his eyes on him, he would drag Yang Fan to patrol the entire Jiannan province, and the final victor would still be the Imperial Censorate. Now that his prestige in Wei province had been completely swept away, he didn't want to stay a moment longer. His next destination was Yao Province. Yang Fan's eye injury had yet to recover, and it was unlikely that he would be able to catch up in a short period of time. The earlier he got there, the more exiled people in Yao Province. Thinking of how an imperial envoy was forced into such a pathetic state, Huang Jingrong's hatred deepened, and he couldn't help but curse. Blocking one's path to riches is akin to killing one's parents. Yang Fan, I hope that your eyes will go blind from now on. At this moment, Yang Fan was taking a stroll in the rear garden of the provincial governor's mansion. The trees here were lush and the light was gentle, which was perfect for his current state. His eyes were still a little swollen, but it didn't affect his movements anymore. Thinking about it, Yang Fan couldn't help but shudder in fear. If he were to really go blind, just the thought of it sent shivers down his spine. There was no lack of bizarre deaths in this world. Jean Jingong drowned in the toilet, the Roman consul Fabius choked to death on a strand of goat's wool, and the Greek tragedy writer Sophocles was even more tragic. He was crushed to death by a tortoise thrown by an eagle in the sky. Even an expert in martial arts could fall into the schemes of others when he was caught off guard. Even though Yang Fan had become an official, he still maintained the habits of a pugilistic man. He liked to do things alone, and at this moment he was truly a little fearful. He had his woman, and his child that was about to be born. Thinking of his child, Yang Fan felt a surge of warmth in his heart. It was as though his entire body was bathed in sunlight, and his entire body felt warm. When he gently stroked his wife's tightly stretched belly and felt the little life in her belly, the excitement he felt was indescribable. When he learned that the censorate respected themselves by killing women and children, he came without hesitation, despite all the difficulties, and even though he knew that it was against the will of the emperor. Among these reasons, the thought of becoming an official was only 1/10 of his motivation. Due to the similar experience in his childhood, 3/10 was due to sympathy, and the majority of it was because he was about to become a father. When he was about to have a little life that would continue his bloodline, he finally understood what it was like. When he heard that the group of cruel officials in the imperial censorate would not even let a baby go, he was really angry. He could not imagine that those cruel officials also had wives and children. How could they be so cold-blooded as to raise the butcher's knife? A worm was wriggling under his feet, trying to crawl across the small path. Yang Fan lifted his leg and stepped over it, feeling the warm and gentle sunlight, breathing in the fresh air of the forest, and thinking of his unborn child. Yang Fan's heart inexplicably softened. At this moment, he was as compassionate as a Buddha. At this time, the sound of a conversation came from ahead. Yang Fan didn't pay it much attention at first, but when the name Sima Bai reached his ears, he couldn't help but stop in his tracks. That Sima Bai is really bold to dare assassinate the imperial envoy. Hi. He was just unlucky. If he had known the identity of the imperial envoy, he wouldn't have done it. Still haven't caught him? Of course not. If they wanted to, they could definitely catch him. The problem is, will those people seriously try to catch him? You know what he does. You said he brings jewels and robes, hidden knives, bear gall, and musk from Tibet. Who can afford these things? And who provides porcelain and silk for him to sell to Tibet? The local rich and powerful families need him, so they won't really catch him. That can't be. I heard from Constable by that Sima Bai was originally hiding in Chen's fish stall on Fish Market Street. When they received the news and went to catch him, he slipped away. Forget it, that's all a bluff. Do you really believe it? Not to mention that they don't know how to catch him. If a Lang wanted to catch him, they could rush over to report before the troops even left the residence. Even if they really caught him, he would be secretly released by those people. Our Lang is an outsider, so he's at their mercy. Right now, that Sima Bai is still hiding there. Will anyone catch him? When I went to buy vegetables this morning, I heard from the people in the market that Sima Bai has already spread the word that the imperial envoy is a person of the imperial court. He can't touch him, but he will definitely use the heads of the entire family of the child who spoiled his plans as a sacrifice to the souls of his brothers. Yang Fan stood behind a tree and quietly listened to the conversation between the two family members of the provincial governor's estate. A trace of murderous intent gradually appeared in his eyes. A gust of wind blew, causing the branches and leaves to sway. A green insect used its countless legs to firmly cling onto the leaves and was currently sucking the sap. Yang Fan flicked his finger, and the green insect fell to the ground. Its body was curled up, but before it could flip over, a large foot stepped on it and crushed it. Chapter 5:14. The afternoon storm came without warning. This place always had plenty of rain at the turn of spring and summer. Weather like this, where the sun was shining brightly just now and the rain poured the next moment, was very common. A few people in woven rush raincoats stepped on the rainwater as they trudged through the heavy rain. The person in the middle was also wearing a woven rush raincoat, but there was someone holding an oil paper umbrella over his head. However, the rain was too heavy, and the raindrops that formed into strings were blown left and right by the erratic wind, constantly hitting the person's body. The umbrella swayed in the wind and rain, but it didn't have any effect at all. The few people in woven rush raincoats hurriedly entered the provincial governor's residence. Only then did they heave a sigh of relief. Pushing their straw hats back, they revealed their faces. The person in the middle was Zhang Jinji. He had just returned from the military governor's residence. Censor Huang Jingrong was in a hurry to leave and firmly rejected Luo Shudao's good intentions of gathering the officials of Wei province to give him a farewell dinner. Luo Shudao could only send Huang Jingrong off. After returning to the city, he asked Zhang Jinji to report the situation, who knew that in just a short while it would start raining cats and dogs. There were long corridors on both sides of the provincial governor's residence's main gate, all the way to the central hall and the rear residence. Zhang Jinji walked down one of the corridors, shaking his drenched robe as he asked, "Where is the imperial envoy now?" The steward answered, "The imperial envoy is rather tired after the heavy rain and has already returned to his room to rest. He instructed us not to disturb him." Zhang Jinji had wanted to immediately inform Yang Fan of Huang Jingrong's departure. Hearing that he was already resting, he turned to his study. The gatekeeper of the provincial governor's residence, Old Do, waited for Ah Lang and the guards to return before closing the main gate again. He fetched a few basins of water to wash the footprints on the stone steps. When he returned to his room, he suddenly realized that something was missing. Old Do looked around and realized that the woven rush raincoat hanging on the wall was missing. It was a rainy season, and rain gear was a common item. Even though he did not go out much, he still had a spare raincoat hanging on the wall when he entered. Because it was hung there every day, he did not pay much attention to it and did not notice when it was taken away. Old Do slapped his forehead and scolded, "It must be that brat Kwang Seer who took advantage of the heavy rain to steal my woven rush raincoat to gamble." Old Do didn't take it to heart after cursing a few times. In any case, no one would purposely come to the provincial governor's manor just to steal a straw raincoat. It must be an acquaintance who had taken it. The moment the heavy rain came, the customers on Fish Market Street dispersed one after another. The heavy rain poured down, splashing onto the ground. Because it could not be drained in a short time, the water was knee-deep. The ground of Fish Market Street was very dirty. After being washed away by the rain, the dirty water mixed with fish heads and organs flowed into the low-lying areas. Usually, the fishy smell here was overwhelming, but in the heavy rain, the fishy smell had lessened. There were no more customers on the street, and a few vendors hid under the awnings of their houses. They did not bring rain gear and did not have time to go home. The fishmonger scooped up the turbid water from the ground with a large wooden basin and poured it on the chopping board under the rain shelter, washing away the blood, scales, and internal organs. A man wearing a woven rush raincoat appeared on Fish Market Street. He waded through the dirty rain, walking from the east end of Fish Market to the west. At first, no one noticed him. It was only when he turned back at the end that he attracted the attention of some people who were taking shelter from the rain. However, because he was wearing a woven rush raincoat, and because he was afraid of the rain splashing on his face, it was impossible to see his appearance. One could only guess from his smooth chin that he was not very old. The banners hanging on the fish vendors' stalls hung listlessly in the rain. Occasionally, when the wind blew, the triangular banners would unfurl, but they would immediately be beaten back to their original shape by the dense rain. However, it was only for a moment, enough for people to see the words on the banners clearly. The man in the woven rush raincoat walked from the east end of Fish Market to the west end, and only saw one stall with the surname Chin. Therefore, when he came back, he went straight to this stall. Old Chen wore a leather apron and was washing the chopping board under the tarp. The rain hit the tarp above his head, making splashing sounds. The dirty blood, fish scales, and innards on the chopping board were washed away by the basin of water into the surging, dirty water. The legs of the chopping board were still stuck to some sticky fish innards. Old Chin used a large wooden basin to scoop up some dirty water. Just as he was about to wash it, the man in the woven rush raincoat walked under the tarp. Old Chen coldly glanced at him and splashed out a basin of water. Some of the dirty water splashed onto the man's woven rush raincoat, but he did not care. He only needed a glance to know that this person was not here to take care of his business. He was probably just borrowing the tarp in front of his door to block the wind and rain. However, the man in the woven rush raincoat looked at him and actually said, "Excuse me." Old Chin impatiently glanced at him. This person's head was lowered, and his facial features could not be seen clearly. His woven rush raincoat was dripping with rain, so only the part below his nose could be seen. This was a young man with a high nose bridge and well-defined lips. He was not ugly. However, the heavy rain had disrupted his business, so Old Chin was in a bad mood. He frowned and asked unhappily, "What is it?" The young man did not mind his bad attitude at all. He very politely smiled, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into two smile lines. "Excuse me, is Sima Bai here?" Old Chen was shocked and suddenly raised his head. The young man was still smiling. He still did not raise his head. There were smile lines at the corner of his lips, and there were two dimples on his cheeks. This young man was not only not ugly, he was actually quite good-looking. The wooden basin in Old Chen's hand fell into the rainwater with a "pew" sound, and it splashed a large amount of water. Old Chen rushed forward and picked up the sharp knife that was stuck on the chopping board. This sharp knife was used by him to slaughter fish. It was sharpened every day, and when he washed it with water just now, the blood on the knife had already been washed clean. The sharp knife in his hand shone with a cold light. Old Chen held the knife in his hand, and without saying a word, he slashed at the young man's chest from top to bottom. It was just like how he usually cut up big fish. Even if it was a big fish that weighed more than 100 caddies, he only needed one slash to cut it from the bottom of the gills to the tail fin. Then he would use his hand to dig out the fish float, belly, and bloody internal organs. The customers sheltering from the rain under the opposite shelter saw this scene and couldn't help but cry out in alarm. The young man raised his head and looked at the knife that slashed down from the sky. The tip of the knife drew an arc, passing by the tip of his nose, and was about to touch his chest. If it continued to slash down, it would accurately cut open his straw raincoat and his internal organs. At this time, there was still a flickering shadow in the air that hadn't disappeared. The young man's hand stretched out from under the straw raincoat like lightning. Old Chin only felt his wrists go numb, and the young man in front of him was still standing there perfectly fine. His straw raincoat wasn't cut open, and his stomach wasn't split left and right like a big fish on a hook. The young man was still smiling and said with a smile, "Looks like he's still here, right?" When he spoke, he raised his head. Old Chin saw that this handsome young man seemed to have an eye disease, and his eyes were a little red and swollen. Old Chin looked down at his chest again. His hand was still tightly holding the knife hilt, but the foot-long knife had already pierced through the gap of the third rib on his chest. Old Chin had killed people before, even though he had killed more fish. If he hadn't killed people before, he wouldn't have acted so decisively and fiercely. That was why when he saw that knife, he knew that he was about to die. He raised his head, and his eyes were like the eyes of those dried fish hanging under the shed to dry. They bulged out as he stared at the man in the straw raincoat. The man in the straw raincoat was currently walking into the house. As he walked, he said to himself, he actually really was hiding here. This is a lawless place, a lawless person. When Old Chun heard these words, he suddenly wanted to laugh. A lawless person had already been killed by you, so who were you? The fishmongers under the opposite shed and at the other stalls all looked over in shock. Some of them had already nervously picked up knives and harpoons. Old Chin swayed a little, and with a splash he fell into the dirty sewage. He was washed away by the flowing rainwater and floated out of the shed bit by bit, moving in the direction of the drainage ditch. A moment later, the sound of shouting and fighting came from Old Chen's shed. Because there was no business because of the rain, Old Chen had already closed the door planks, leaving only the entrance and exit door open. At this moment, there was a loud bang. The door planks were hit by a huge force and suddenly burst open. The slot at the bottom of the door planks was also broken. The row of door planks slammed into the puddles of water, splashing onto the faces of the onlookers, who looked as if they had seen a ghost. The onlookers were shocked to see a limp body, as if all the bones in its body had been broken, roll out several times from the tilted door planks. Its head fell into the water, and its feet rested on the door planks, and it stopped moving. Then the man in the straw raincoat walked out step by step. His head was still lowered, and still no one could see his appearance. The man in the straw raincoat walked forward step by step in the roiling muddy water. He had a feeling that his blood was swelling. This was what he had yearned for the most in his youth. But how long had it been since he had this feeling? He was a wanderer in the city, hiding in the streets and alleys, free and unrestrained. Later, he discovered that his martial strength was not even worth mentioning compared to the great power of the government. For revenge, in order to grasp even greater power, he decisively threw himself into the officialdom. But after being an official for so long, he had been stuck in a pile of rules all day. He had almost forgotten the simplest and most effective method. As a result, he was always restricted by the rules and had to follow them, even things that could be resolved without using the rules. He was used to using methods within the rules to resolve them. The terrifying consequences of almost being blinded and Sima Bai's threat to an innocent child had aroused the viciousness in his heart. Today he was once again Feng Fu, and his heart was truly carefree. At the same time, and most importantly, the killing on the streets of Fish Market had broken the shackles in his heart. Wanderers used their martial strength to break the law, and officials used their power to maintain the law. These were originally two conflicting and incompatible aspects. When he was a wanderer, he stood against the government. When he became an official, he abandoned the actions of a wanderer. Now that he could break this shackle, he was both an official and a wanderer. In the future, what in the world could restrain him? Lightning flashed in the sky like a purple python, and then a bolt of lightning struck down, causing the earth to tremble violently. The man in the straw raincoat suddenly laughed loudly in the thunderstorm, reciting, "I killed someone on the streets of Fish Market. The heavens poured rain to wash away the mortal world. Do not ask about other people's business. Jing Qiyuan and Qin Wuqing." The man in the straw raincoat waded through the rain, his steps becoming larger and larger. As if he was cleaving through the waves, he walked toward the end of the long street. Many pairs of eyes looked at him from under the sheds of different heights. There was fear, bewilderment, and viciousness, but no one dared to charge up. The man in the straw raincoat walked as if there was no one around him. Amidst his loud laughter, he disappeared into the misty rain. Chapter 5:15. The gatekeeper, old Do, went to the latrine. When he came back, he discovered that his raincoat was already hanging in the room. The raincoat was dripping wet, and there were even some mud and tree branches stuck to it. There was a puddle of water on the ground, and there were still water droplets dripping down from the raincoat. Old Do couldn't help but curse. Kwang Seer, this son of a B***th. After that, he took off his raincoat resentfully and went to wash it. Provincial Governor Zhang's dinner was simple but sumptuous. There were 2 pieces of flatbread stuffed with alfalfa and eggs, a bowl of delicious noodles with coriander, and soup, a plate of fried bean sprouts, and a plate of fresh fish slices. This was his dinner for today. Of course, there was also good wine. Old Zhang would drink a cup of Jiannan Braising Spring every night. He didn't drink too much, and he would drink a cup every night. This was just to activate his blood vessels and not because he was addicted to alcohol. Ah Lang! The supervisor called out and hurriedly walked in. The rules of the Zhang residence were very strict, adhering to the teachings of the sage. Don't speak while eating. Only this personal supervisor would dare to come in and disturb Zhang Genji when he was eating. And if the supervisor came in at this time, he would definitely have something important to report. The supervisor knelt down in front of Zhang Genji and leaned forward, saying in a low voice, "Sima Bai is dead." Zhang Genji took a sip of wine and raised his white brows, asking, "He killed him?" "Yes." Hee. Zhang Genji laughed. Good. This person doesn't respect the laws and doesn't abide by the rules. As long as he feels that it is right, he will do it, not caring what methods he uses. This young man is worthy of being a comrade. Zhang Genji raised his neck and drank the remaining wine in the cup in one gulp. He stroked his beard and passed the wine cup to the steward. He said happily, "Make an exception tonight and pour another cup for this old man." Early in the morning, Yang Fan felt that the fire poison had been purged a little more. His eyes felt more relaxed. Other than feeling pain when he moved his eyes too much, he didn't have any problems seeing things normally. Yang Fan was very happy. After taking a walk in the courtyard, he heard voices coming from the Gu siblings' room. Knowing that they had woken up, he walked towards their room. The day before yesterday, he and Zhang Genji bombarded Huang Jingrong one after another and finally overturned Huang Jingrong's decision. However, it was already late at that time, so Luo Shudao only sent someone to the Cheongsi yesterday to order the people of Liuha to return home. Because Gu Huan had been injured by the lime, he had to stay in the provincial governor's manor to recuperate, so the Gu siblings were not sent back that day. However, Yang Fan had already asked Luo Shudao to send a messenger to inform their parents of the whereabouts of the Gu siblings. As soon as Gu Huan saw Yang Fan, he greeted him happily. "Uncle Yang, my eyes have recovered. Are your eyes better too?" Gu Yuan quietly followed behind his brother and shyly called out to Uncle Yang before whispering, "Uncle Yang, can we go home today?" Yang Fan was just feeling that they had woken up especially early today. When he saw the passionate gazes of the siblings, he remembered that he had promised them yesterday that he would send someone to send them home today. Yang Fan smiled. "Don't worry, the people from the provincial governor's manor have just woken up. After breakfast, I will ask Zhang Gong to send someone to send you back." Before he finished speaking, Zhang Genji's deep and clear voice came from behind him. "Haha, I was just thinking of coming to check on Yuanfang's condition. It seems that Yuanfang's eyes have recovered. Good morning, Zhang Gong." When Yang Fan heard the voice, he hurriedly turned his head and saluted. Gu Yuan also sensibly pulled his brother to salute this official. Zhang Genji nodded his head and said, "The morning air is fresh and refreshing. Let's take a walk in the courtyard. Breakfast will be ready in a while." The few of them walked out of the room. As they were going to return to their parents' side today, the Gu siblings were exceptionally happy. Yesterday, they weren't in the mood to play, and today their interest was piqued by the curved bridge in the provincial governor's manor. Thus, they ran over to the bridge to look at the swimming fishes. Yang Fan walked beside Zhang Genji as they strolled by the pond. looking at the siblings on the bridge. Zhang Jianji smiled and said, Yuan Feng is exceptionally concerned about these two children. Yang Fan glanced at the goose siblings and said emotionally, When I was young, I had an elder sister who doted on me dearly. Seeing them reminds me of my deceased elder sister. Now that I'm able to take care of them, I guess it's also a way to cherish the memory of my elder sister. Zhang Jianji said, Yuan Feng traveled a long distance to Jiannan to save the people from their plight. You are warm-hearted and concerned about the world. This old man admires you greatly. Yang Fan smiled and said, Zhang Gong is overpraising me. Actually, I don't think too much about what I'm doing. All I want is for my peace of mind. Zhang Jianji shook his head and said, This old man isn't overpraising you. His Majesty ordered you to escort the princess to Chang. But you disobeyed the emperor's orders and rushed here just to reduce the suffering of the innocent. How many people in the world are capable of such a feat? To travel a long distance alone without fear of danger. How many people in the world are capable of such a feat? Yang Fan smiled faintly without saying a word. Zhang Jianji glanced at the siblings on the bridge and saw them playing with the fishes in the water. Thinking that they were here to feed them, the fishes in the water surged out of the water. Some of the larger fishes even leaped into the air, splashing water all over their faces. The crisp laughter of the siblings could be heard from afar. Zhang Jianji sighed and said, It's fortunate that Yuan Feng came in time. This is the fortune of the siblings and the people of Feng Province. However, how many people in the world will suffer the same fate? The Imperial Censor's cavalry is everywhere. How many people can Yuan Feng save? Yang Fan sighed and said, In this world, there's always a need to ask for something. What should I ask for? In my opinion, it's enough to ask for peace of mind. What is peace of mind? In fact, there's no need to limit how much you can do. It's enough as long as you do your best. Well said. Zhang Jianji clapped his hands and praised, A real man should worry about the world, the country, the people, and the times. For the sake of righteousness, even if you know it's impossible, you will still do it. However, if you do your best to save more people and relieve more suffering, will Yuan Feng be willing to do it with this old man? When Zhang Jianji said this, his face full of age spots became unusually serious. His pair of old eyes looked at Yang Fan with a burning gaze, so bright that no one dared to look at him directly. Yang Fan was startled, looking at Zhang Jianji's old and determined face. His expression also became solemn. He said in a serious tone, What does Master Zhang want to teach me? Zhang Jianji said, Yesterday, Huang Jingrong left Feng Province for Yao Province because you foiled his plot. What are your plans, Yuan Feng? Yang Fan was shocked and cried out, What? Huang Jingrong has already left. This is bad. Why did Master Zhang only tell me now? Nephew must rush over immediately. Zhang Jianji said, What can I do even if Yuan Feng rushes over? Just like in Feng Province, using imperial edict against imperial edict to stop him from killing people? If he went somewhere else, what would Yuan Feng do? Wait for you to rush over and collect the corpses of those people who died in vain. Even if you can keep an eye on Huang Jingrong and prevent him from killing anyone, how are you going to stop those ruthless officials who are running amok in Dian, Qian, Guangxi, and Min? Yang Fan looked at Zhang Jianji with a strange expression. He vaguely sensed something. The anxious expression on his face gradually calmed down. He cupped his fists and asked, I wonder what Master Zhang's brilliant plan is. Zhang Jianji said, This old man has a plan. Not only can we get rid of Huang Jingrong, this ruthless official, we can also startle the world with our actions, so that the ruthless officials in other provinces will not dare to act blindly without thinking. We can also use this opportunity to eradicate them in one fell swoop. However, this plan is very dangerous. Is Yuan Feng willing to face the national calamity with this old man for the sake of millions of common people? Yang Fan said, What is the plan? Zhang Jianji was not vague. He spoke frankly and confidently, leaving Yang Fan dumbstruck. Yang Fan came from Nanyang. His initial goal in entering Luoyang was to find his enemies hidden in the government. In his heart, he had never regarded imperial power seriously, nor did he revere it. He was very indifferent to the concept of the law. But when he gradually understood the power of the secular world and realized how laughable his dream of sweeping the world with one sword was, he began to try to solve problems within the boundaries of power. Over time, he became accustomed to doing things within the boundaries of order. Yesterday's murder in Fish Market broke the shackles in his heart, but it only made him pick up his dream of being a wanderer again. From now on, he would use the methods of the government to solve problems that could only be solved through the methods of the government. He would no longer be bound by the rules of the government for matters that could be easily solved through violence. But in his heart, there was still a clear distinction between the two. How could two opposing sides possibly fuse together? But never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that Zhang Jianji, a 70-year-old old man who had been working in the government for his entire life, would have such a bold idea. To think that such an extreme and risky idea would come from a 70-year-old old man who had been working in the government for his entire life. If he hadn't heard it from him personally, Yang Fan wouldn't have believed it at all. Zhang Jianji's voice carried a hint of killing intent. Rather than trying to solve the problem, why don't we find the root of the problem and end it once and for all? The reason why Zhang Jianji dared to reveal his plan to Yang Fan was because he had complete trust in Yang Fan. He believed that even if Yang Fan didn't approve of his actions, he wouldn't betray him. If Yang Fan had gone against the ruthless officials of the imperial censorate, there were plenty of loyal officials in the royal court who could have done the same. However, going against the imperial edict and rushing to Jianan in advance was a feat that required great courage. Thus, how could such a loyal official report Yang Fan to the imperial court? Of course, if Yang Fan was unwilling to participate and he still wanted to proceed, then he would be playing with fire. It was very likely that the situation would develop to a point where he could not control it. In that case, he was very likely to give up his plan. If he gave up on his plan, he wouldn't have to worry about Yang Fan reporting him. As long as he denied the matter, Yang Fan's words wouldn't be able to do anything to him. However, just because Zhang Jianji trusted Yang Fan's character didn't mean that he could work together with Yang Fan. After all, Zhang Jianji still had to know whether Yang Fan was a law-abiding person or not. Zhang Jianji had been an official for many years, and he had seen many upright officials who were bound by the rules and had no choice but to do things that went against their conscience. Yang Fan's decision to go against the imperial edict was courageous, but it couldn't be considered as law-abiding. After all, one only needed to possess fearless courage to go against the imperial edict. While there weren't many officials who dared to go against the imperial edict, they weren't the only ones. Thus, Zhang Jianji set up another trap to test Yang Fan. Sima Bai was killed by the Wanderer, and Zhang Jianji was relieved. Yang Fan was someone he could take as a comrade. What he wanted to do, he needed to have the world in his heart, to be righteous, to have great courage, and even more so, to achieve his goal, he needed to be unscrupulous and unscrupulous. Zhang Jianji's plan was simple. Make use of the rebellious tribes of the southwest and Huang Jingrong's insatiable greed to incite conflict between them and force the barbarians to rebel. It would be best if they could kill Huang Jingrong, but if they couldn't, the royal court wouldn't let them off either. No matter how isolated the provinces were from the news of the rebellion would spread at the fastest speed. Most of the places where the exiled people were sent to were remote and inhabited by the minority tribes. Once the news spread, the officials of the various provinces would greatly reduce the possibility of cooperating with the imperial censorate in order to prevent the same thing from happening in their own territories. The officials of the imperial censorate would also refrain from taking action for fear of harming the innocent. In order to avoid repeating Huang Jingrong's mistake, they wouldn't dare to recklessly slaughter the exiled people. With this one move, they could destroy the cruel officials and protect the people. However, the imperial censorate had come to this place to investigate the matter of a rebellion. If there really was a rebellion, it was very likely that the emperor would have a false impression that the imperial censorate will report the truth. Thus, this matter was like playing with fire. If it wasn't handled properly, it could backfire on itself. In this case, there were two things that had to be done. First, the emperor had to obtain the memorial to expose the crimes of the cruel officials before the barbarians rebelled. This was to lay a foreshadowing. If the barbarians really rebelled, the emperor wouldn't completely believe the imperial censorate's words. Second, they had to quickly quell the rebellion. They had to control the situation before the royal court sent an army to encircle and suppress them. When the barbarian leader's memorial arrived at the royal court and compared it with the previous official's memorial to impeach the imperial censorate, the imperial censorate's crimes would be confirmed. They would be eradicated in one fell swoop and would never be able to rise again. Zhang Genji's plan could not be said to be not vicious. This was also the reason why he needed Yang Fan to participate in it. Once the war started, to quickly quell it, he needed someone who could represent the royal court to appear in time to negotiate with the leaders of the rebellious tribes. He needed to appease them in time and lock them up before they caused an even greater disaster. Zhang Genji, this old man, had probably been working at the grassroots level for too long. He had been squatting in one position for dozens of years. Moreover, this position was pitifully small. It wasn't easy for him to get the opportunity to directly enter the central government. But within 2 years, he was demoted to the capital. This kind of experience was really too special. It was inevitable that he would develop an extreme personality. Thus, although Zhang Genji was over 70 years old, he was far from the calm and steadiness that other people in their 70s should have. On the surface, he gave his colleagues and others the impression that he was calm and steady. But deep down, he was an adventurer, a great adventurer. It was just that his adventurous spirit was not reflected in the conquest of the natural world, but in the officialdom. For the first 80 years of his life, no one had heard of him, and he could compete with the legendary Jiang Ziya. But in the last 2 years of his life, he had only been the prime minister for 3 months, and his name had already gone down in history. He was one of the famous prime ministers of the Tang dynasty, along with the conscientious Fang and Du, who had ruled the country for their entire lives. He had only been the prime minister for a little less than half a year, and he had become a prince like Guazi and Zhang Changgong, who had fought for their entire lives and made unparalleled contributions to the country. There had only been one such person since ancient times. Even the male protagonists of those YY novels could not compare to him. Such a fantastical life naturally did not follow the normal path. When Yang Fan heard his plan, he only felt a wave of fear. Cold air whooshed from the back of his head. This old man was really too bold. He could actually think of such a terrifying plan. Using rebellion as a game, he was practically starting a revolution in the Southwest. Chapter 516. Yang Fan said solemnly, "You want the barbarians to rebel, but at the same time, you have to do it within a controllable range. How confident are you of this, Duke Zhang?" Zhang Genji smiled and replied, "I have been in Jianan for 2 years now, and this is the 3rd prefecture I have been appointed as. I have a deep understanding of the local situation. The rebellion of the barbarians is nothing out of the ordinary, and they will rebel over even the most trivial of matters. Give them a sweet treat, and they will return to their farms. It has always been like this." Yang Fan asked, "Why haven't I heard of such matters when I was in the capital?" Zhang Genji replied, "Because the matter has been resolved smoothly and the local officials have turned the matter into a minor one. In the past, it was either due to the royal court's unjust decree or the royal court's responsibility, or it was due to the fact that it was impossible for anyone to be responsible for the matter, and thus everyone wanted to resolve the matter peacefully. But now, do you think that the local officials and chieftains will still be willing to resolve the matter peacefully with someone like Huang Jingrong?" A glint flashed across Yang Fan's eyes, and he asked, "Duke Zhang said that they don't want to resolve the matter peacefully this time around. If that's the case, how can we control the situation?" Zhang, Genji replied. The crux of the problem lies with you and Huang Jingrong. If the culprit, Huang Jingrong, is executed, and if you, the imperial envoy, were to step forward to clean up the mess, what do you think will happen? Those chieftains are not idiots, and they have never been arrogant enough to think that they have the ability to stand against the royal court. However, they know that if the royal court were to send troops to wipe out the barbarians, they would have to fork out a huge sum of money. Thus, the royal court is unwilling to resort to violence when they can appease the barbarians. As long as we can strike a balance on this point, we will be able to control the situation. Yang Fan frowned, and after walking along the pond for a moment, he suddenly stopped and asked Zhang Jinji, "What does Duke Zhang intend to do?" The two of them stood by the pond for a very long time. Amidst the morning mist, their silhouettes could be vaguely seen. The distant mountains, the nearby lake, the fake mountains, the little bridge, the pavilion, and everything else was shrouded in the morning mist, resembling a painting. As the sun became brighter and brighter, the morning mist gradually dispersed. Yang Fan and Zhang Jinji's figures also dispersed. Send 2 men to escort Miss Guyuan and her brother back. Hand them over to their parents personally. Zhang Jinji stood in the courtyard and instructed the steward. He then turned around and walked to the study. There were 2 rows of antique bookshelves in the study. On top of the bookshelves, there were a few pots of wisteria. The tender green branches and leaves hung down, adding a touch of liveliness to the quiet and elegant study. A gray-robed monk was sitting cross-legged behind a few tables. There was a pot of incense burning on the tables. The gray-robed monk sat cross-legged in meditation, counting the beads with one hand. His eyes were slightly closed as he softly chanted the scriptures. Zhang Jinji walked into the study without disturbing him. He picked up a prayer mat and sat cross-legged across from him. The gray-robed monk looked to be in his 30s. He had fair skin, light brows, and a handsome face. The gray-robed monk chanted for a while before opening his eyes gently. Seeing that Zhang Jinji was already sitting in front of him, he hurriedly pressed his palms together and smiled. "Master Zhang." Zhang Jinji smiled and said, "Yang Fan has agreed." Oh, the gray-robed monk was overjoyed. He chanted the name of Buddha and said, "If that's the case, the demon Huang Jingrong will be executed. The plight of the people in Jiannan will be resolved." Zhang Jinji said, "A few days ago, this old man has already submitted a petition to impeach the officials of the border prefectures. They have neither the heart to pacify the enemy nor the ability to govern the land. They are cunning and scheming, forming alliances with one another, supporting their children, and fleeing from the central plains. They view the lawless land of the border prefectures as a paradise. Since Jin Yuanfang has agreed to cooperate with this old man is prepared to submit another petition to impeach Huang Jingrong, accusing him of extorting the local authorities and abusing torture. Wherever he goes, he will incur the wrath of the people. However, this old man is just an external official. In the eyes of the emperor, I am far less trusted than the officials of the imperial censorate. I will have to contact my comrades and submit a petition to impeach Huang Jingrong. I will have to trouble Master F.A. Lin to handle this matter." The gray-robed monk hurriedly said, "I am willing to work for Master Zhang." This monk's surname was Chen, and he was a member of the Qin clan of Yingchuan. He was also a descendant of an aristocratic family. The reason why he became a monk was naturally because of a great change in his life. Therefore, he was a firm believer in the anti-martial faction. His identity as a monk was only a convenient condition for him to travel the world. He was not a true devout Buddhist. Otherwise, as a Buddhist disciple, there was no reason for him to be on good terms with Zhang Jinji of the Li sect and plot against Wu Zetian, the great protector of Buddhism, when Wu Zetian was a devout Buddhist who had raised the status of Buddhism. Now that Buddhism was in vogue, F.A. Lin, as a monk, roamed the various prefectures, visiting rich and powerful families and befriending officials. would not attract the slightest bit of attention. With this identity, he could cooperate with Zhang Jianji and contact more loyal and righteous officials who were determined to restore Li Tang's rule. Fa Lin happily said, Master Zhang's plan can get rid of cruel officials and protect the people. It can also attract the attention of the imperial court and strictly investigate the mediocre officials of the border prefectures. It can be said to be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Zhang Jinji stroked his beard and said with a smile, Not only that, Wang Xiaojia has advanced step by step and won victory after victory. The 4 towns of Anxi are about to be recovered. At that time, our imperial court's military might will be unparalleled. When the army returns, it can even intimidate the barbarians. The barbarians rebelled today, we can pacify them, and when the situation is stabilized, we can wear down their arrogance and make them more respectful to the imperial court in the future. Fa Lin's eyes flickered, and she said happily, This is called killing 4 birds with 1 stone. Zhang Jinji said, After this matter, Yuan Fang will be in the same boat as me. This person is a new noble in the imperial court, young and promising. What's rarer is that even though he is in a high position, he does not forget his roots and is a righteous official of the country. With this person in the same boat as me, in the future when the wind and clouds meet, we can work together to restore the country. Won't he be a great help? Fa Lin clapped and laughed. Haha, in that case, it is killing 5 birds with 1 stone. Master Zhang's talent is enough to stabilize the world and bring peace to the country. A mere provincial governor is really a waste of talent. If he becomes the prime minister in the future, he will definitely be able to bring peace to the world. Zhang Jianji smiled. Master is praising me. Fa Lin said, There is no time to lose. This poor monk will go now. Zhang Jianji stood up and said, Thank you for your trouble, master. Fa Lin cupped his hands and said, This is a matter of supreme merit. This poor monk dares not to serve. After saying that, he picked up his straw shoes and left. Zhang Jinji knew that this monk was easygoing and did not like to be restricted by common customs, so he did not send him off. After waiting for him to leave, he sat down behind the table and rotated the incense burner lightly. There was a faint smile on his face. Killing 5 birds with 1 stone, is it really only 5 birds? The imperial court's control over Yao province was actually weaker than Feng province. After Yao province submitted to the imperial court only started to set up a military governor's office in the first year of Tang Gaozong's Linda. Since then, it was repeatedly set up and abolished. The local rich and powerful families hoped to be controlled by the imperial court in name, but in reality still had complete autonomy. The imperial court tried to intervene in Yao province to strengthen their control. It was naturally as difficult as ascending to heaven to insert influence into a territory that was not won by force. After a long period of assimilation, perhaps after a few generations, the imperial court's influence would gradually seep in. However, the imperial court was too hasty, and in the end, not only did they not achieve their goal of strengthening and stabilizing their control over the area, but it also caused long-term unrest in the area. In addition, the area was adjacent to Nanzhao and Tubo. The Yao province's big clans and Nanzhao and Tubo were related by marriage. Nanzhao and Tubo were also related by marriage. Although Nanzhao and Yao province's big clans were closer to Li Tang, once the imperial court tried to intervene in Yao province's affairs, they would lean towards Tubo's side. Therefore, if the imperial court tried to send troops to suppress them with force, they would not only have to prepare for war with the Yao province's local tribes, but also for Nanzhao and Tubo to participate in the war. This was also the reason why the imperial court had a headache. They had to tighten their grip and loosen their grip. They did not dare to be too forceful. However, Huang Jingrong did not understand these situations. He buried his head in books and poetry. After he became a jinshi, he stayed in the capital. Then, because he latched onto the right person, he was brought into the imperial censorate by Lai Junqian. From then on, He devoted himself to the great cause of punishing people. He did not understand the current political changes, especially the situation in the remote border provinces. He regarded the people outside the capital, especially the big clans in the border provinces, as country bumpkins. He did not know that he himself was a canary raised in a cage. In the capital, imperial power was above everything else. It was a power that could destroy everything. Therefore, with the imperial edict in his hand, he thought that he could call the wind and summon the rain. He was omnipotent. Because of Yang Fan's obstruction in Yao province, he could not show off his power and did not gain enough benefits. After arriving in Yao province, his desire to make a fortune became even more urgent, and his methods became even more aggressive. After Huang Jingrong arrived in Yao province, he learned his lesson from Yao province and refused to interrogate the cases step by step. When he was in Yaozhou, he pretended to round up the Lu people and tried to find a satisfactory reason before executing the criminals. This time, when he rushed to Yaozhou, the first thing he did was to round up the Lu people and kill them. The governor's office in Yao province was sometimes established and sometimes abolished. When the office was established, there were refugees sent over. When the office was abolished, the refugees would no longer be sent there. When the office was abolished, the refugees would no longer be controlled by the government. They would leave the settlement designated by the court and scatter to various places in order to make a living. Because of this, the number of refugees that Huang Jingrong had hastily arrested was very limited. There were only 7 or 8 families in total. These were all refugees and commoners who had not left the boundaries of Yao province. Huang Jingrong was very dissatisfied with this. He felt that with so few people, it was hard to believe that they were rebelling. However, it was difficult for him to arrest more people. On one hand, the governor's office and the provincial governor's office had been abolished time and time again. The records of the government had been lost. Many of the refugees no longer had any household registration records and could not be found. On the other hand, many of the refugees were protected by the local commoners. The commoners here did not care if you were a criminal exiled by the court. The families that were exiled were the families of officials. Their children were literate and well-mannered. The commoners here liked to claim kinship with these kinds of families. Once they became in-laws, they would naturally receive their protection. In Wu Zetian's reign, in order to ascend the throne, the number of officials from the previous dynasty who had been attacked was innumerable. Just the aristocratic families and high-ranking officials of the third rank and above had implicated thousands of families and hundreds of thousands of people. These officials also had factions and subordinates in the local areas, so there were even more officials who were implicated. The number of refugees that had been sent to Yao province was not just this few. However, some of the refugees had lost the control of the government and moved elsewhere. Many of the refugees that had remained in Yao province had received protection because they had married into the locals. The government could not capture these people, or perhaps they did not dare to capture them or did not want to capture them. Because the government had been abolished several times, the prestige of the government had fallen to rock bottom. The local commoners did not fear them at all. The families that Huang Jingrong had killed were those who had not left Yao province. They were from the aristocratic families of the Central Plains and were unwilling to marry into the barbarians, so there was no one to protect them. Huang Jingrong was at his wits' end and could only put his energy into gathering money and women. He was prepared to scourge other provinces when he had enough. Who knew that this scourge would cause such a big mess? Chapter 517. In the distance, a river rolled down. There were a few small dots on the silvery water. Only by standing by the river could one see them clearly. They were a few small boats that were fishing in the stormy waves. The fisherman stood on the bow of the boat with his bare feet. His 10 toes were spread out habitually and firmly attached to the deck. The boatman at the stern of the boat plunged the bamboo pole that was as thick as a goose egg into the water and firmly held the boat in place. The muscles in his arms bulged like heavy stones because of the strength he exerted. At this moment, the fisherman at the bow of the boat twisted his waist and raised his arms gracefully. The net in his hands was like a light cloud as it was cast out. The hillside was covered with paddy fields of irregular shapes, as if a heavenly mirror had been broken and scattered on the ground. Wisps of lush green drilled out of the white water surface, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds, interweaving to form a beautiful picture. The farmers with their trousers rolled up had mud on their stomachs as they trudged through the paddy fields. With every step they took, the soft and smooth mud would squeak out of the gaps between their toes and fingers like a mischievous loach, causing tiny bubbles to ripple on the water surface. Sweet mountain songs floated above the paddy fields. The farmers who were working in the paddy fields sang one after another. There were men and women, old and young. They sang one after another, enjoying themselves. In fact, the sun was a little hot, but the people here were used to this kind of weather. A horse turned around halfway up the hill. It was a purplish-red horse. Its tail drooped as it trotted weakly. A man in green sat on the horse. He wore a bamboo hat on his head and had a saddle on the horse's, but it was obvious that he was a long-distance runner. Although the bamboo hat blocked the sun, sweat still flowed down his temples and gathered on his chin, dripping onto the horse's back. He looked into the distance. There was a winding mountain path that led to an unknown place. On the path, there were 4 or 5 girls carrying water on their backs, walking towards him. These girls were all wearing white blouses embroidered with red birds. Their right collars were adorned with playful silver ornaments. Their slender waists were tied with an embroidered ribbon. They wore a pair of blue trousers and a pair of embroidered, white-knotted shoes on their feet. They looked elegant, playful, and charming. The girls were all young, around 12 or 13 years old. The girls here matured early and got married early. Those who were slightly older were already married. Even at their age, many of them were already married. The green-clothed man quickly jumped off the horse's back and used the back of his hand to wipe the sweat off his face. He politely asked the ladies with a smile, "Excuse me, ladies, how far is it from here to Yaozhou City?" "Ah, he's a Han man." As soon as they heard his accent, the girls laughed heartily. One of the girls turned around and raised her hand, pointing enthusiastically, "Here, you go from here. There's a fork in the road ahead. Don't take the left one, or else you'll be taking a long detour. You go straight down to the river and follow the river upstream. About 7 or 8 miles away, there's a suspension bridge." The little girl's Chinese was not very standard, but her voice was sweet and sweet. The summer dress was very thin. She raised her wrist with the silver bracelet on it and pointed into the distance. She twisted her waist and raised her arm. Her chest stretched out into a beautiful curve, making her blushing face look even more beautiful. The green-clothed man smiled and nodded. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your guidance." The other girl saw that this Han man was handsome and spoke in a refined and polite manner. She suddenly smiled and said, "Han man, you must be thirsty. Do you want to drink some water?" "Sure." The green-clothed man revealed a mouthful of white teeth and laughed heartily. "But what do I use to drink?" He had already seen the water basket on the girl's shoulder, but there was no bowl or ladle. He didn't have a crow's beak, so how could he put his mouth into the water basket to drink? The girl giggled and said, "You are really stupid. I will pour it for you." The girl tilted her shoulder and held the bottom of the water basket with one hand. The clear water poured down. Yang Fan squatted down and opened his mouth wide to drink the sweet water. One of the girls mischievously pushed the girl carrying the water. The girl cried out and her body swayed. The water splashed onto Yang Fan's face. The girls all giggled. The girl glared at her friends. Under her black and bright eyebrows, her eyes curved into a shy crescent moon. "I am sorry, Han man." "It's nothing. After this, I feel cool." The green-clothed man wiped the water droplets off his face. His sweaty face was indeed much cooler. The girl bit her lip and smiled foolishly. She waved at him and said, "Let's go." The girls stood shoulder to shoulder. No one knew what they were talking about. Sometimes someone giggled, and sometimes someone chased after them. The water splashed on their shoulders and flashed in the air before falling back into the basket. Suddenly, one of the girls turned around and shouted at the green-clothed man, "Han man, welcome to our White River tribe." Yang Fan turned around and waved at them. When he turned back again, a sweet and melodious song sounded behind him. "Sister, Ashiani," I heard hay bells ring across the mountain, and I don't know where you and I are, and I going. Yang Fan smiled and shook the horse's reins. He liked this place. The scenery was beautiful, and the people were simple. The passionate girls were like Nanyang girls. Once they liked someone, they would not hide it and pursue them openly. They would provoke you, but they would not accommodate you. They were like clear mountain spring water, always running freely on their predetermined path of life. He had heard that the imperial court had once sent 500 pass guards to guard Yaozhou. Because of the dangerous terrain and the heavy miasma, they had all died in the end. This time, Zhang Jianji had specially prepared medicine to prevent the miasma. But he saw that the scenery here was beautiful. It was like a paradise. How could it be so dangerous? Yang Fan had forgotten that he grew up in Nanyang. He could adapt well to the weather here. In that era, there was not much population movement. Soldiers who were thousands of miles away from their homeland were indeed not acclimatized. A place that was like heaven to him could be held to others. The sky was blue, and the river was like a beautiful ribbon. The wind blew gently on the hillside, and the paddy fields on the hillside sparkled. Yang Fan's figure gradually disappeared at the end of the hillside amidst the passionate and sweet mountain songs of the girls. In the governor's office of Yaozhou, Governor Wenhao was holding a banquet to welcome the imperial envoy. The officials who had come to see the imperial envoy were in a mess. There was no order at all. Compared to the officialdom of Yaozhou, it was a completely different situation. Yaozhou had submitted to the imperial court relatively late, so the military governor and provincial governor here were also hereditary officials, selected from the leaders of the local tribes. Because it had not been long since Yaozhou submitted to the imperial court, logically speaking, the military governor and provincial governor should be the leader of the tribe with the greatest power here. Unlike Luo Shudao in Yaozhou, who had declined after a few generations and became an out-and-out bureaucrat. However, the actual situation was not like this. The commander-in-chief of Yao Province and the provincial governor of Yao Province were indeed the leaders of the larger tribes in the area, but in terms of strength, they were at most ranked third and fourth. There were two even larger tribes above them, but they did not hold any official positions. Why did this situation occur? Because the two tribes were of equal strength, and it was difficult to tell who was superior. The two large tribes were the White Man and the Crow Man. The two tribes were of equal strength. So who would be the governor, and who would be the governor? No one was willing to lower their head to someone else. In the end, they could only compromise and choose the third and fourth strongest tribe. These two equally powerful tribes became existences that surpassed the local government. This was also the reason why, when the imperial court wanted to strengthen its control over Yaozhou, the governor and provincial governor would be removed from their positions due to the strong resistance of the local tribes. This was because behind them were the leaders of two even more powerful tribes. They were the White Man's Xuanqi and the Crow Man's Mengzhizhu. These two families were the great clans that had existed in the southwest for thousands of years. For example, the Crow Man's Mengzhizhu was from Jianing. His ancestor was Menghua, who had been captured by Zhuge Liang 7 times. After Xuanqi angrily returned to Yaozhou from Yaozhou, he had not even sat down when he heard that Huang Jingrong had chased after him from Yaozhou. Xuanqi had been humiliated by Huang Jingrong in Yaozhou, and now that he had returned to his territory, the person hosting the banquet was weaker than him. How could he personally attend the banquet? Thus, he only sent his son. Zhizhu had always liked to compete with Xuanqi. He was not willing to be inferior to Xuanqi in any matter. When he heard that Xuanqi was not going, he did not go either. Following his example, he sent his son to attend the banquet. In the governor's office, other than Governor Wenhao and Provincial Governor Yunxian, who wore official robes, even the officials under them wore the clothes of their own tribes. Regardless of whether they held official positions or not, they would all be addressed by their position and status in the clan. For example, chieftain, chieftain, big head, small head, big head, small head, big head, little head, small head, small head, small head, etc. It was only when Huang Jingrong arrived in the southwest that he realized that the difference between chieftain and chieftain was not just a difference in terms of address. In reality, there was a huge difference between the two. A chieftain was the ruler of a territory and the owner of the land. When the commoners cultivated their land, they had to pay the chieftain their grain. The chieftain controlled the political, economic, and military power of the territory. In reality, he was equivalent to the ruler of a country. The chieftain was a direct relative of the chieftain. He had the same authority as the big chieftain, but his status was even higher, equivalent to a prince of a country. Below chieftain were the big chieftain, small chieftain, head steward, second steward, head steward, and head steward. Huang Jingrong could not tell the difference between them. In any case, in his eyes, these people were all country bumpkins. He was the imperial envoy and could decide anyone's life and death. Thus, he was too lazy to remember these people's official positions and names, too lazy to distinguish their status, and too lazy to be courteous with them. Because of his disdain, the two most powerful chieftains in the area did not appear. They only sent a son to half-heartedly attend the banquet, so he did not discover them. Huang Jingrong's half-heartedness and disdain naturally made these chieftains and chieftains secretly unhappy. However, he was, after all, an imperial envoy sent by the court. It was not worthwhile to fall out with him over such a small matter. However, there were even fewer people who were willing to enthusiastically go up to chat. Everyone just half-heartedly greeted him and then slipped to the side to chat with acquaintances. Seeing this, Huang Jingrong was even more displeased. The banquet began. It was as chaotic as a mountain king holding a meeting in a hall. The chieftains and chieftains stood and sat without proper etiquette. They drank from large bowls and ate large mouthfuls of meat. Huang Jingrong saw that they had no respect for him and felt even more displeased. As soon as Governor Wen invited him to lecture everyone, Huang Jingrong stood up with a straight face, determined to give everyone a show of strength. Chapter 518. I am here to inspect the Jiannan prefectures in order to apprehend the traitors who have colluded with, bribed, and colluded with other tribes to rebel. Huang Jingrong's face was as dark as a stormy cloud, and his voice was cold and laced with killing intent. But to these chieftains, it was no different from playing the lute to a cow. If these threatening words were spoken in the Chinese officialdom, the officials who heard them would immediately feel their hearts tremble. They would be afraid that they would be dragged into this, and they would immediately feel uneasy. But in this place, Huang Jingrong's words were even worse than a fart. The people who drank continued drinking, and the people who ate continued eating. There were even people who played finger-guessing games. Huang Jingrong was furious. Slamming his palm on the table, he bellowed, "I have already obtained conclusive evidence. According to the name list I have obtained from the Bureau of Punishments, a total of 329 tribes have been exiled to Yao Province, totaling more than 4,800 people. Where are these people? Yesterday, only 7 tribes were executed, totaling a mere 36 people. Where are the rest?" Huang Jingrong coldly swept his eyes over these headmen who, in his opinion, were not much better than bandits. He said in an awe-inspiring voice, "Someone is harboring criminals. Just based on the fact that they are harboring criminals, this imperial envoy can judge them as accomplices. Moreover, since they are able to do this, how do we know they are not accomplices? I will definitely investigate this matter, and no matter who I find, I won't let them off lightly." The voices of the crowd softened a little, but those who were drinking, eating, whispering, and patting each other's shoulders were still as lively as ever. Huang Jingrong took a roundabout approach and said, "Don't think that I can't do anything to some people just because they are far away. All lands under the heavens belong to the emperor. So who can escape the rule of the emperor? Once I find out who is colluding with the vagabonds, I will definitely apprehend them and bring them to justice." Huang Jingrong glanced at the crowd coldly and said, "Perhaps there are some who are confident that their tribes are strong enough to stand against the soldiers of Yao province. But if the imperial court were to dispatch the heavenly soldiers, do you think you will have the strength to stand against them? Right now, Wang Xiaozhi's expedition to Anxi is about to return victorious. If the sage were to issue a decree to command this returning army to Jiannan to exterminate the bandits, with the momentum and sharpness of a great victory, there would be no one who could stand against them." Sensing the tense atmosphere, Wen Hao hurriedly raised his cup and said, "It must have been tough for you to come from afar. Today, the chieftains of the various tribes have arrived to welcome you back. Imperial envoy, please accept a toast from us first. As for official business, we can talk about it later, right?" Wen Hao smiled and gave Yun Xian a meaningful glance. Provincial Governor Yun immediately stood up and pulled out a small silver knife from his waist with a smile. The knife was incomparably sharp and flickered with a cold light. A vermilion table was placed at the front of the hall, and on top of the table was a huge bamboo tray. On top of the tray was a roasted whole goat that was glistening with a golden glow. The whole goat here was made from the finest 2-year-old goat. After chopping off its head and hooves, removing its innards, egg yolk, salt water, turmeric, cumin powder, pepper, and flour, it was then baked in a hot pit. The fragrance of the meat wafted into the air, making one salivate at the sight of it. Yun Xian used his silver knife to slice off a few slices of the juiciest meat of the goat and served it on a plate to Huang Jingrong. With a smile on his face, he said, "Imperial Censor Huang, try this roasted goat. This is a local delicacy." The goat meat was still steaming, and before it was served, a rich fragrance of meat assaulted Huang Jingrong's nostrils. However, Huang Jingrong noticed that the chieftains didn't seem to be reprimanding him with respect, and this made him even more furious. Upon seeing Yun Xian serving up the goat meat, he immediately made use of this opportunity to reprimand them. "His Majesty has already issued a ban on slaughter. As officials of the imperial court, do you all still not know about it? What kind of crime is it to defy an imperial decree? Take it down." Yun Xian was rebuked in front of everyone and couldn't help but feel vexed. He cursed in his heart, "Damn it! When this official set up a banquet to welcome you yesterday, the table was filled with meat and wine. But I didn't see you acting so righteously." However, in front of so many people, he naturally couldn't refute. He could only obediently obey and wave his hand, ordering the servants to take away the whole roasted goat. Huang Jingrong pointed at the meat and wine on the banquet and said, "Take away all the meat." The ban on slaughter issued by the sage is a sign of mercy towards all living beings. As officials of the imperial court, we should set an example. You all even dare to ignore the decree of the sage. It's no wonder. Huang Jingrong pointed his finger slowly and reprimanded without stopping. When his finger pointed at a certain spot, his voice suddenly stopped. He saw a young lady. This young lady was wearing a moon-white blouse, a red waistcoat, and a short embroidered apron around her waist. She was wearing wide-legged blue pants, and her figure was as graceful as the clouds under the moon. Her jet-black hair was tied with a red ribbon, and the snow-white tassels under the flowery headscarf brushed against her beautiful and charming face. Her face was like the full moon, her eyebrows were like distant mountains, and her lips were like a pair of tender and beautiful flower petals. What a beautiful young lady of the barbarian race! The young lady was standing behind the guest at the head of the table. Huang Jingrong's eyes were at the top of his head, and he kept sweeping his gaze across the people in front of him to display his power. He actually didn't notice that there was such a lovely beauty right beside him. The young lady in white bent her slender waist and was whispering something to the red-chested man sitting at the banquet table. After she finished speaking, she smiled charmingly and stood up, walking briskly out of the room. Huang Jingrong's greedy eyes chased after the young lady's lithe and graceful back until the young lady completely disappeared through the door. Only then did he reluctantly withdraw his gaze and stared at the man with all his might. He didn't know if that abnormally beautiful young lady was the middle-aged man's concubine or daughter, but he already had the greedy thought of taking her into his own room. Sun Er was naturally restless. When she heard that her eldest brother was replacing her father to visit the imperial envoy in Yaozhou, she pestered him to come along. Just now, she had been chatting with Governor Wenhao's womenfolk for a while in the back residence and wanted to go stroll around the streets. She specifically ran over to tell her eldest brother, but she didn't expect that Huang Jingrong would see through her and actually have designs on her. Huang Jingrong temporarily suppressed his lustful thoughts and continued to display his official authority, ordering people to remove all the meat. This official banquet was originally focused on big fish and meat. If the meat was removed, what would be left on the banquet table? Did he want everyone to turn into rabbits and chew on a basket of turnip grass? When the chieftains saw that this imperial envoy was being so unreasonable, they were all unhappy. After 3 rounds of wine, they all bid their farewells and left, not caring at all about Huang Jingrong's increasingly ugly expression. The welcoming banquet ended on bad terms. Huang Jingrong saw the rudeness of the crowd and was secretly resentful. He only thought about how he would teach these chieftains a lesson. He might even have to use the methods he had used in Feng Province to capture a chieftain or chieftain and kill one to serve as an example to the others. The officials here are too outrageous, all of them with no respect for the law. Governor Wen, Provincial Governor Yin, you too have failed to educate them and will not be able to escape punishment. Huang Jingrong walked into the back residence with his hands behind his back, reprimanding the governor and provincial governor along the way. Yun Xian smiled and said, "Imperial Censor Huang, it hasn't been long since this prefecture submitted to the imperial court. Most of the officials and chieftains are wild and hard to tame. Imperial Censor Huang, don't be angry. They are just used to being wild and don't understand the system of the imperial court. They didn't mean to look down on you." Huang Jingrong gave a heavy humph and said, "This imperial envoy is patrolling Yao Province. The officials of Yao Province and the chieftains of the various tribes have invited this imperial envoy to a banquet. This is an official social event, but in the end, even the female guests can openly walk around the hall. What kind of propriety is this?" Yun Xian asked curiously. It can't be. Most of the chieftains don't have female relatives with them. Even if they did, they would be placed in the back hall. Why would they come to the front hall to roam around? Huang Jingrong said, "Why not? This imperial envoy saw it with my own eyes. It was the chieftain on the first seat to the left of the seat of honor. At the time, that female was standing behind him and talking. She turned a deaf ear to this imperial envoy's lecture. Yes, she was about 16 years old and was dressed in white." Wan Hao let out a soft "ah" and slapped his forehead. "I remember now. That was the daughter of the chieftain in the smoking period. She didn't have a proper name and only had a nickname, Sunner. She came with her big brother." Wan Hao said with a face full of smiles, "Imperial Censor Huang, this is a misunderstanding. If it was her, even if she came to see the imperial envoy as a representative of the smoking period chieftain, it would still be completely in accordance with etiquette. Because here, the wives and daughters of the chieftains all have authority, just like the officials of the imperial court. If the chieftain passes away and his son is still young, the maidservant, the chieftain's wife, can act as regent. If the chieftain doesn't have a son, his daughter can also inherit the position of chieftain. She can also marry into the family of another chieftain's son to inherit the position. Therefore, Sinner entering and leaving the main hall is not against etiquette. The daughter of the smoking period chieftain? Huang Jingrong secretly memorized this name and repeated it twice. He suddenly felt that it sounded familiar. He thought about it carefully and suddenly remembered. He couldn't help but cry out, "Ah, this imperial envoy remembers now. I saw him in Yao province. Sun Qi is a chieftain of your Yao province. Why didn't he come to see this imperial envoy? Instead, he called his children over?" Wen Hao hesitated for a moment and said, This governor had sent an invitation to Chieftain Sun Qi. It was just that Chieftain Sun Qi felt unwell, so he ordered his eldest son to represent him to see the imperial envoy. Wen Hao's tribe strength was not as strong as Sun Qi's, but he was the governor of this province and the highest-ranking official in Yao province. Usually, when he interacted with Bai Man, many unpleasant things must have happened. Therefore, there was no need for him to cover up for Sun Qi in front of Huang Jingrong. These words were not true, and his tone was very forced. Huang Jingrong could naturally hear that Sun Qi was looking down on him and was being disrespectful. Originally, Huang Jingrong didn't want to let Sun Qi off just because of this matter. Now that he was thinking about his daughter, this thought became even more intense. If I make Takanori a traitor, wouldn't Takanori obediently hand over his daughter in order to survive? Huang Jingrong felt that it was more and more wonderful. He couldn't help but stroke his beard and laugh. Chapter 519. On a piece of snow-white silk cloth that was as smooth as paper, there was a weasel's hair that was as sharp as a needle, rising and falling as if it was flying. The image of a charming and charming woman gradually appeared on the silk cloth. Huang Jingrong put the brush down and gently caressed the smooth silk cloth, as if she was caressing the woman's lovely face. In Feng province, he had captured Kan Chi under the pretext of rebellion. Kan Chi immediately admitted defeat and presented him with large amounts of gold, jewels, and jade, as well as 2 beautiful barbarian women. This gave Huang Jingrong the feeling that this person was weak and easy to bully. He did not know that those gifts and the 2 beauties had been given to him by Luo Shudao on behalf of Kan Chi. He felt that as long as he captured Kan Chi again and gave him a good beating, it would be enough to make the other chieftains grow wary and give them lavish gifts. At that time, as long as he made a slight gesture, Kan Chi would readily recognize him as his son-in-law. In truth, there was not much difference between the beauties. Whether it was in facial features, skin, figure, or posture, there was not much of a difference. It was very obvious that a crane stood out among chickens. But how could a crane stand out among cranes be so obvious? At this time, the difference was in temperament. The 2 barbarian beauties that Luo Shudao had presented to him each had their own attractive points. But compared to Sun Er, they seemed a bit petty. Sun Er was the daughter of a chieftain and a barbarian princess. She had a noble and elegant temperament, but this temperament was completely different from the daughters of the ambassadors and ministers in the capital. After all, she was a woman who had grown up freely in the mountains and forests. She had a freshness and liveliness that the ladies of the capital did not possess. This kind of difference was like the difference between a glass ball and a diamond of the same shape. These 2 temperaments that should not have been compatible with each other perfectly merged on her body, giving her a unique and enchanting charm. It was precisely this kind of spirituality that could not be seen on many beauties that moved Huang Jingrong's heart. He wanted this woman, and all of this depended on the strength of his pressure. He believed that as an imperial envoy, wielding the sword of the emperor to look down on the hundreds of officials, it was enough to make these mountain kings who were hopping about in the southwest bow their heads. However, even if he had enough strength, he still needed speed. He was afraid that Yang Fan would chase after him to Yao province and ruin his plans, so he impatiently pressured the Yao province military governor and provincial governor. He believed that the 2 of them would not dare to not submit. In the past, the imperial censorate was able to harvest the prime ministers like they were leeks. Although it was not as good as it was in the past, it was still easy to deal with a few officials from the border provinces. The military governor's mansion in Yaozhou was the original chieftain mansion of Wan Hao's tribe. It had a total of 4 courtyards. The first courtyard was the court and prison cells. The second courtyard was where the chieftain worked and the civil and military subordinates handled official business. There was also an armory where important military supplies were stored. The third courtyard was the private school, the study room, the accounting room, and the place where the chieftain entertained guests and held large-scale meetings. The fourth courtyard was where the chieftain's family lived. There was also an inner study, an inner accounting room, and some necessary guest rooms. In the center of the entire building complex, in the depths of the fourth courtyard, there was a large hall. This was where the chieftain handled secret matters and made important decisions. Even his family members were not allowed to enter easily. The large hall was constructed from chestnut wood. The left wing was made from chumu wood, and the right wing was made from catalpa wood. This was in line with the meaning of standing upright in the spring and autumn, hoping to pass down the legacy for generations to come and prosper. At this moment, in this large hall, the military governor of Yao province, Wen Hao, and provincial governor Yun Xian were discussing official matters with solemn expressions. There was no one else in the large hall. About 5 to 6 zhang away from the large hall, there were tall buildings surrounding the large hall. There were people walking downstairs and people living upstairs. There were long corridors connecting the buildings, and soldiers wielding spears patrolled the buildings. In the large hall, Provincial Governor Yun Xian said in a deep voice, "This opportunity cannot be missed. Brother Wen, are you still hesitating?" Wen Hao said hesitantly, "Brother, we can't act rashly. The Sun clan and Meng clan are the major clans here, having a legacy of 1,000 years. They are big and have deep roots. We should plan slowly, planning before taking action." Yun Xian smiled coldly. "If we plan slowly, they will have a legacy of 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 10,000 years. At that time, the tree will be bigger and deeper, and you will be able to shake them. In my opinion, this is our only chance. Borrow the power of the imperial court to eradicate them in one fell swoop. If we miss this opportunity, they will have to ride on our heads for generations to come. We won't have such a good opportunity again." Wen Hao's brows furrowed as he asked, "Have you thought of the consequences of failure?" Yun Xian replied disapprovingly, "What consequences can there be? The ones who want to touch them are the imperial envoys and the imperial court. Our 2 clans were forced into a corner and could only follow orders. If the imperial court attacks, they will have to rely on us to govern this place. At that time, we will be the subjects of the imperial court, and from then on, we will rule the world. If we fail—" Yun Xian narrowed his eyes and said sinisterly, "That will naturally be Huang Jingrong's fault. The imperial court will remember our loyalty and will definitely give us many benefits in the future. On this side of Yao State, while the Sun and Meng families are more powerful than us, they can still swallow us to death. We are only fearing the imperial court and obeying orders. What can they do? We can only suffer this loss in silence." Wen Hao gently shook his head and stood to pace for a while. The greed of success and the fear of failure repeatedly battled in his heart, and he struggled endlessly. After a while, he said, "The opportunity is indeed rare, but for the sake of safety, we should rope in the Meng family to attack the Sun family together. What do you think? This can ensure success, and if we fail, with the Meng family holding the fort, the Sun family will not be able to find us." Yun Xian's expression was very ugly. "Brother Wen, with the power of the Meng family, if we rope them in, then after the Sun family collapses, will it still be our turn to take over their land and people? At that time, wouldn't the Meng family be the sole power? The Meng family will have the final say in Yao State, and no one will be able to control them. Won't it be even more difficult for us?" Wen Hao thought about it and felt that it was reasonable, so he said, "If that's the case, then we can throw the Meng family to the side and combine the power of our 2 families to deal with the Sun family." Yun Xian's expression became even uglier as he said, "If there are a few small chieftains that join hands and want to annex my territory, what will Brother Wen do?" Wen Hao's eyebrows raised, and he said, "They dare? We are brothers, so I will naturally do my best and send troops to help you get out of trouble." Yun Xian said, "If our friendship is average and we don't even have any contact, then what?" Wen Hao looked at him strangely and thought for a moment with his brows furrowed. He suddenly slapped his thigh and said, "Then I will also send troops and rebel against them. If they dare to break the rules, what will happen if others learn from them in the future? Besides, if you fall, they will annex your territory and people. After their power grows, they will make a move on me." Yun Xian became excited, and his dark red face became even darker due to being flushed with blood. He said passionately, "That's right. When I was very young, my father invited learned scholars from the Central Plains to teach me. After I familiarized myself with the history books of the Central Plains, I discovered a very strange thing. The dynasties in the Central Plains changed very frequently. No matter how powerful a dynasty was, it would be replaced by another dynasty in at most 200 or 300 years. I found it very strange. Who was the strongest 1,000 years ago? Why was his family still the strongest 1,000 years later? Why is it that all of the chieftains here are not as strong as the emperor of the Central Plains, and we don't have such a strict and perfect system? But even though there are frequent battles between the various tribes here, it is never painful or itchy. After 1,000 years, the structure is still the same as it was 1,000 years ago. The descendants of those who were chieftains are still chieftains, and the descendants of those who were chieftains are still chieftains. They have not become bigger or smaller. Why? Wen Hao was attracted by this topic and asked curiously, "Why do you think?" Yun Xian said, "It is because every generation of chieftains and chieftains have the same thinking as you just now." Of course. Thinking this way is not wrong, because if you don't do this, the one who is eaten today could be you tomorrow. But why does it have to be like this here? Because we have strong practitioners here, but there has never been a person like the Emperor of the Central Plains who can turn the entire world into his family's world. Everyone wants to become stronger, to climb up, to obtain more, but they are also afraid of losing what they have now. We have big chieftains, big-headed people, and small-headed people. Everyone has their own territory and people. Whoever wants to annex someone else's territory, and people will receive the hostility of all the other chieftains and chieftains. They are worried that you will become their enemy, so everyone will unite to suppress you. If we want to challenge a stronger chieftain, we have to unite all the other stronger chieftains. But if we do that, the ones who will benefit are the stronger chieftains. So why do we have to go through all the trouble? If we don't unite with the chieftains who are stronger than us, whoever wants to make a move will be treated as a black sheep by all the other stronger chieftains. Because of this, whether it is intentional or not, everyone will work together to maintain the order of inheritance here and not want it to change. This is the reason why the great aristocratic families in the Southwest have not declined for 1,000 years. But it is different now. We have the right time, the right place, and the right people. Brother Wen, there is no better opportunity. The more Yun Xian spoke, the more agitated he became. He jumped up and said with spittle flying, "Now the biggest protectors of order in the Yao State area are the Sun and Meng families. Our families are second only to them. With the imperial court supporting us, we can at least ensure that the other large clans won't dare to interfere. If we fail, there is still the imperial court's army. If we let go of such an opportunity, the heavens will not tolerate it. The ancestors of your Wen family will not forgive you." Wen Hao took a deep breath and said, "You believe Huang Jingrong's words? You think the imperial court will send troops?" Yun Xian said, "Have you not heard of the power of the imperial censor? The emperor listens to everything the imperial censor says. Whoever they say is a rebel will be finished." Wen Hao said, "But I heard that Lai Junqian was demoted and the imperial censor is not as good as before." Yun Xian said, Lai Junqin has fallen, but the imperial censor hasn't. This can be seen from the imperial envoy inspecting the area to investigate the rebellion. When Hao was silent, Yun Xian said, "The most important thing is that we have a way out. If we lose, there is still the imperial court. If the imperial court isn't willing to send troops, then we can throw out Huang Jingrong to appease the public. We can attack and retreat. What is there for us to be afraid of? At worst, we will just lose some troops. But compared to the benefits we might gain, isn't it worth it? We will change the situation here that hasn't changed for 1,000 years." When Hao was moved, he raised his head and a sharp light shot out of his eyes. "You are right. I'll take the gamble." The imperial censor was driven to desperate action and fabricated a rebellion to gain self-respect. Zhang Jianji wanted to take advantage of the situation and burn all these bastards in one fell swoop. Wen Hao and Yun Xian wanted to take advantage of the situation and use the imperial court's power to challenge the class system in the southwest that hasn't changed for 1,000 years. Isn't that also a risk? Who says we don't have an adventurous spirit? Our officialdom is a paradise for adventurers. Huang Jingrong looked at the beauty on the silk for a long time and wrote a poem for her. A single braid tied with red ribbons. A full head of brocade makes her exceptionally beautiful. Tassels peeking at the beauty. Clouds at her temples, secretly drawing her bangs back. White robes with tight sleeves pity a rye lake. A crimson-red collar twirling around Song Mountain. After writing the poem, Huang Jingrong stroked his beard in contentment and smiled in intoxication.